Great. It's 6 o'clock. Thank you everyone for attending tonight's special city council meeting. We are here tonight live at the Mill and virtually on Zoom. Welcome to the meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Chellan, do you mind doing the roll call?
Sure. Councilmember Daughtry.
Present.
Councilmember Peter Shagan.
Present.
Councilmember Donahue.
Present.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Present.
Councilmember Jorstad.
Present.
Councilmember Ewing.
Present.
Councilmember Tadgett. I know you're online.
Present.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We all have an agenda in front of us. There have been two additions to the agenda. The first addition is under guest business. We have Dina Dawson from the AWC here with us to make an announcement presentation. And then there's a memo in your packet from Barb Stevens, Finance Director, that she would like to speak to and have that added to the agenda under City Department reports.
Move to approve the agenda as noted.
We've got a lengthy discussion. I don't know that this finance payroll thing is pressing in any way, since we have no real agreement with the sewer district.
So we have a motion on the table. Let's see if there's a second first, then open it up for discussion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'll restate my comments. I think this isn't a pressing issue with the sewer district. We have no agreement in place. We're years away from that happening. And so I don't know that it's necessary to do an add-on at a meeting that we have a very lengthy discussion pending, and a walk-on in-person discussion.
May I just comment on that? It's just a quick briefing. It's actually saying we're not going forward with that at this time. There's no council action involved. It's just so that we can actually post the position for payroll and just letting council know our direction with that.
Thank you for your report.
Any further discussion? We'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the agenda going forward with the two added items, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Thank you.
Yes, it was.
I believe it was an aye.
Yes, it was.
Councilmember Tadgett, what was your vote on that? Yes or no?
Get back to him later.
Next item on the agenda, citizen comments. We have the opportunity for folks in person to comment as well as on Zoom. We'll start with virtual comments. If there's anyone virtually watching the meeting that would like to participate in citizen comments, please raise your digital or actual hand. Okay, yeah, great, thank you. For those of you in person, if you do have a public comment, we ask that you fill out a green sheet. They're located back on the back table. So we have a couple people going back to grab those. While you're filling out your green sheets, I think we'll start with the first one that we have. Connor Davis, if you could step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Connor Davis, 2106, here in Queen Center Drive, Northeast. I'm here today on behalf of myself and Michael Brewer. Mike is another planning commissioner. We both served on the SBR subcommittee. So first of all, thank you all for your time this evening. I come before you tonight to make a brief statement in support of the work of the SBR subcommittee and clarify what appears to be some level of misunderstanding on the part of several council members February 21st council meeting. After discussion, the original SDR proposal is submitted to council by the planning commission. Council directed the establishment of a subcommittee to rethink SDR regulation in Lake Stevens. The advisory committee was made up of a diverse set of stakeholders, including SDR property owners, impacted residents, council members, and planning commission. All volunteered their time to be part of the process, and we participated in good faith effort to provide a path forward on this topic for the city and its residents. Planning department staff assisted the committee in our effort by providing additional research and legal guidance as we went through our work, and took the recommendations and ideas from the committee and put it into bill form. They should be recognized and commended for their work. The draft ordinance recommended by the SDR advisory committee represents a compromise that retains the ability of property owners to operate in SDR in a compliant fashion, provides a means of licensure for their business ventures, and establishes a cap on the number of SDRs to ensure the city's rental stock is not overwhelmed by rent by the day units. It should be noted that the cap agreed to by the SDR committee is already above the number of SDRs, legitimate or otherwise, found in Lake Stevens. This draft ordinance represents a necessary first step. Should a shift in the legal environment require revision in order to meet the needs of citizenry and property owners, the council can quickly revisit it. It applies to both semantic changes regarding noise, as well as central issues, notably the cap on the number of SDR permits available on an annual basis. Let us be clear, short-term rentals represent commercial business ventures in residential neighborhoods. Until this process began, all but a handful of these properties were flying under the radar. I believe one was in compliance. The beneficiaries of SDRs are the property owners and the revolving door of guests. The externalities and burdens are then put on the surrounding neighborhoods and the renting public, who, according to the MRSC and the Harvard Business Review, see increased rents and unit scarcity in tight housing markets. It's time to move forward on this. Out of respect for the work of the members of the Planning Commission and the SDR subcommittee perform, it's time for an up or down vote on it.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Donna Robbins. I'm one of those SDR owners, but I'm not a corporate one. I'm a small business owner. My husband, Brett, and I sold a 4 acres farm called Singing Tree Acres in Kirkland. That was in my husband's family since 1951. In 2020, we purchased about an acre property in Lake Stevens, which I named Paleo Maluhia. It's a house of peace. We offer our private property as a short-term vacation rental to traveling nurses, physicians, and licensed nurse practitioners to help fill the demand for healthcare in the Lake Stevens and Everett, Washington community. We also offer an ATU at our private property in Florida as a short-term property to traveling nurses, to help fill a critical need for healthcare in our community, not just in Lake Stevens, but also in Florida. By imposing increased restrictions on Lake Stevens Municipal Code 14.44.064, which began with 2 pages of restrictions and is now 7 pages of restrictions. Property owners who live on the lake, like Kathy Meiser, said in email testimony dated February 20th, 2023, stating in part, I'm sorry for the people that want to rent out their properties in this manner. But personally, I would prefer that they are not allowed at all. In an email dated February 21st, 2022, Eileen Stratton, who lives on the lake, mentioned the Birch family who operate STV Rentals LLC. They purchased their property next to the Stratton's and chose to operate a verbal. We don't do Airbnb or verbal, we do travel nurses. FurnishFinder.com. In an email dated March 2nd, 2022, Bruce and Nikki Odegaard stated in their email testimony that their family has lived in their lake house for the last 4 years. They do not want Airbnbs and verbals in their neighborhood. My husband and I do not live on the lake. We have about an acre property in West Lake Stevens. Why are those property owners who live on the lake allowed to use local government to exert force on those of us who don't? For example, on page 3 of Lake Stevens Municipal 14.4, a minimum of 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for the rent, and we have 8 parking spaces on our private property of 1 acre. The citizen subcommittee mentions Airbnbs and burglaries, but they never mentioned FurnishFinder.com or traveling nurses.com. According to FurnishFinder, which caters to traveling nurses, physicians, and licensed nurse practitioners, as well as traveling professionals in ICU. From March 11th through March 18th, there were 15,836 searches for hosting. In the last 12 months, there were 300.
That's 3 minutes.
For context, there are currently 201 whole house rentals
That's 3 minutes, please.
and 2 houses are near to Lake Stevens. I agree with Councilmember Steve Ewing, who commented the restrictions are unduly restrictive and that notifying neighbors of STRs is problematic.
Excuse me, Lena, we're at the 3-minute mark, so we need you to wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Furthermore, page 2 of the proposed revised Lake Stevens Municipal Code states short-term property rental owners, operators shall maintain current insurance, but I already have property insurance. It's DP3 for a rental property. Our primary residence in the state of Florida, and we live on 10 acres in Peace. We use our private property in Lake Stevens during the spring, and we rent it out to traveling nurses and physicians who want to come to the Lake Stevens and neighboring communities
Thank you, Lana.
to
We're
fill
gonna
up
need
their needs.
we're gonna
Do
need to
better, Lake
move to the next
Stevens.
person.
This is clearly government overreach catering to a few property owners who live on the lake. We have rights too, the ones that don't live on the lake. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Could I make, she could submit those written comments as well.
Thank you. Lana, if you'd like to submit those comments, if you're full written comments, we'd be happy to review them. Thank you.
Can I ask a question of Lana, please? Just a quick question.
Okay.
Lana, how long are your rentals done with traveling nurses and physicians?
For about 4 years.
No, how long do they usually rent your property for when they rent it?
To a year.
Okay, thank you.
And that's critical because the STR committee did not mention that. Nobody mentioned traveling nurses, and I think
Lana, thank you very much.
Steve
That's-
Ewing was the only one that mentioned it was overreach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answer.
Rajesh.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rajesh and I'm a resident of Snohomish. I live in 708 21st Place, Snohomish. The reason why I'm here today is that about a property that got in 2022 docket.
Rajesh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are you here for the public hearing that's coming up? For the comprehensive plan docket?
Yes,
Okay.
I apologize.
No, you're totally fine. We're gonna do public comments specific to that public hearing when that item comes up on the agenda. So if you wouldn't mind waiting just a little
Sure.
bit and I'll call you back up.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Moving on to the next item, we have guest business. We have Dina Dawson from Association of Washington Cities here who would like to make a brief presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the council. Thanks so much for having me tonight. My name is Deanna Dawson. I'm the CEO of the Association of Washington Cities. It's really exciting to be here with all of you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I'm here tonight because we're here to celebrate Councilmember Kim Daughtry for some really excellent work that he has done. He's being recognized tonight for receiving an advanced certificate of municipal leadership. So just before I go into explaining what that is, I'm going to give you just a very brief overview. I know you have a very busy council meeting tonight, but the Association of Washington Cities, we're a voluntary association. We represent all 281 cities in Washington state. And our mission is to support our members through advocacy, education, and services. And I think many of you on the council and maybe some of you in the audience are familiar with the advocacy work that we do. We lobby down in Olympia and we're working to make sure that cities are strong and effective. But in my mind, really the most important thing that we do as an organization is we provide education and training to our city officials. And that's the biggest impact that we have. We ensure that our elected officials have the tools and training and education that they need to be really, truly effective leaders. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do training around roles, responsibilities, and legal requirements of cities. We talk about public sector resource management. We do training on community planning and development, effective local leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a host of other topics that are really important and that all city officials should learn about. And I will tell you, though, we do this thing that is a certificate of municipal leadership, that is a demonstration to everyone that somebody has really taken it upon themselves to be well educated and to be really skilled in these areas. And there are many people on this council who have done a great job in that training. Mayor Gailey has his certificate of municipal leadership. Councilmember Dickinson also has her certificate of municipal leadership. And we have a couple of you who are really close to getting your CML. Councilmember Petershagen has 28 credits. Councilmember Tangent has 35 credits and just needs to get a little bit more training in a couple different areas, and they'll get their certificate of municipal leadership as well. But it's a very small number of elected officials in the state of Washington who have taken enough courses and done enough training to get this advanced certificate of municipal leadership. So to get that, you first have to get your CML or your certificate of municipal leadership by getting 30 credits of training. And then after you've done that, then you need to do another 30 credits of training in each of those 5 areas that I mentioned earlier. Plus, you have to do a lot of community service to really show your commitment to your community. And again, it's a very small number of folks who actually get that each year. It's a really huge accomplishment for anyone to get that. I think we had only 18 people last year who received an advanced certificate of municipal leadership, and that's out of thousands of elected officials at the city level in Washington state. And Councilmember Daughtry has received that advanced certificate of municipal leadership. So I just think it's a huge testament to him and really to your whole council and to your whole community that you have someone who is that committed to serving the community well. So I wanted to be here tonight to say congratulations, Kim. It's great to see you on a screen. I've known you for many years, and I'm really proud of this work that you've done to get this. Congratulations. And I hope the rest of you will follow in his footsteps and get your advanced certificate of municipal leadership too. Congrats to all of you who already have your CML. And to the rest of you, I hope you will attend our annual conference in June in Spokane, because that's a great way to get some of those certificate of municipal leadership credits. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about this or about EWC in general, or I can let you get back to your busy meeting. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Deanna. I appreciate it.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Congratulations.
I just wish that I were there to give it to you in person. I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight.
Should have you go run the gauntlet.
No, no.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our next item of guest business, I'm going to turn the podium and the mic over to Lance Holman from Holman Capital.
Good evening. I'm Lance Holman. I'm president of Holman Capital Corporation, and our company is a direct lender to municipalities in the United States. I'm going to give you a very brief presentation. I'll take about 10 to 15 minutes of your time and just give you a brief overview of what we do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about interest rates and what's happening in the economy. And then lastly, some strategies that you might want to consider as you look to, do infrastructure improvements throughout your city. So what do we finance? We finance all of your needs as a municipality. So your energy needs, so that's your solar, your wind farms, your HVAC, your boilers, your chillers. On the equipment side, your fire apparatus, any aircraft, any 911 systems, your computer systems. On the infrastructure side, your water treatment plants, your pipelines, your water meters. And on the real property side, your administrative facilities, your parks and recreation, your schools, your fire stations, your police stations. So what's our value proposition? We endeavor to deliver to our clients customized financial solutions. We offer public sector expertise. Our transaction sizes are as small as 250,000 up to 100 million, financing terms up to 30 years. But where we really, I think, deliver results is customization to create payment streams and structures that fit into your particular budget so that you can optimize that budget and buy more assets today at lower prices versus waiting in the future when it becomes more expensive. As the previous slide stated, we fund all municipal asset classes. We have simplified the documentation with what's called a master financing agreement, which is essentially a global loan document that allows you to put multiple loans with separate payment schedules under one global document. And then quick funding. What do we mean by quick funding? 30 days. So when you're looking to acquire your assets, you can pay for your assets with cash, or you can finance those assets. If you're looking at a cash financing strategy, a couple of things to consider. Number one, the further the project is into the future, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, the more difficult it is to estimate the project costs. Number two, the Federal Reserve Bank has been pumping trillions of dollars into the US economy for the past 40 years. Well, that's inflationary. But also you've noticed a rise in your prices with the pandemic. So there's been an additional pumping of stimulus into the economy, which further exacerbates the prices. When you hold your assets longer on your balance sheet and you look at your income statement, you will notice that you have higher operating and maintenance costs associated with those assets. There can be internal competition for resources for competing projects. Now, I'm the first person to say take as many grants as you possibly can get, but keep in mind while you're waiting on that grant, your labor and material costs are rising, eating into the net benefit of that grant. But bar none, the number one issue with cash financing is that it depletes your reserves, and your reserves are your lifeline. And so when you look at cash financing as a strategy in its totality, it could deliver a lower return on capital for a public agency. Now, this is the first point we wanted to make. It's called Municipal Projects and the Cost of Waiting. And we've actually written a white paper on our website at homeandcapital.com under our Knowledge Hub. But in this brief example, the public agency believes that it will cost $10 million to build this project. And when it gets around to it, maybe a few years later, the price has escalated to $13.4 million. However, back in year one, you could have acquired the asset for $10 million and locked in that project cost. You would incur a $1.9 million in interest expense plus your $10 million of principal for a total outlay of $11.9 million compared to $13.4. Thus, you're saving $1.5 million to the bottom line. And so an acquisition strategy you could consider is to acquire your assets today at a lower price. Go ahead and pay the interest over the life of the asset. This will improve your cash flow and generate savings to your bottom line. Now, if you're looking at bond financing or direct lending, there's some comparisons. Here in Washington State, it doesn't require voter approval unless you reach a certain level. So that's an advantage and it allows you to act more quickly. But bonds offer very competitive rates. However, you don't know what the interest rate on the bond is until the day the bonds are sold. It's similar to buying gas at the pump. You don't know what the price of the gas is until the day you pull up to the pump, or you don't know what the price of the airline ticket is until the day you buy that airline ticket. Additionally, with bond financing, you have to hire a team of finance professionals to market and sell your bonds. So you've got rating agencies, trustees, underwriters, legal counsel, and you've got ongoing disclosure. So all of those additional costs have to be rolled back into your interest rate. It's an excellent product. However, it's really designed for much larger transactions, $50, $100, $200 million deals where you can spread the cost over a larger base. Additionally, bonds come with increased restrictions. And the number one restriction in a bond financing is that the bondholder, i.e. the investor, would like a period of time where you cannot pay them off early. So you borrow money for 20 years and they say for the first 10 years, you can't pay them off early. Well, that is restrictive to your balance sheet. And then finally, a longer funding cycle, depending on the state you're in. But here in Washington State, you can do it more quickly. Direct lending. In direct lending, no voter approval is required because there's no tax increase associated with that. Number two, it has to offer you competitive rates to compete with the bond world. But like a mortgage, when you're asking for a mortgage on your house, we can give you a rate lock for 30 to 45 days. So as long as the transaction is approved through your agenda process and your governing body approval process within a 30 to 45 day period, the rate in the proposal will match the rate in the final loan agreement. Minimum fees, you're talking $5,000 to $10,000 in fees, all in everything, regardless if you're borrowing $1 million or $100 million. Less restrictions. You have the right to pay off that obligation on any scheduled payment date at the purchase option price. That is maximum flexibility to your balance sheet. And then quick funding, 30 days. Here's the second point we wanted to make, looking at the true cost of financing. Here you have a side-by-side comparison of bond financing and direct lending. In this example, they're both borrowing $5 million. You can see that the interest rate on the bond is slightly lower at 2.5% compared to 2.7%. They're both borrowing money for 10 years, and they both have 12 monthly payments, and here are your monthly payments. But this is where they differ. In the bond world, you've got to go out and hire this team of finance professionals to market and sell your bonds. And so they have fees associated with it, and rightfully so. But those fees must be added back into your total cost. And now when you compare them side by side, you can see in this example that direct lending is slightly more attractive. Additionally, this $78,000 has to come from someplace. And so it typically comes from the amount of funds that you borrow. So what you actually receive net of fees is the $4,921,500. And the next thing you have to look at is what is your true cost of funds? So you would take your net proceeds of the $4,921,000 as an inflow, and then you would have an outflow of the $47,000 and change for 10 years on a monthly basis. And when you compute your internal rate of return, your true cost of funds is a 2.83%, not 2.50 versus 2.72 and 2.70. Now, as you push out the financing term to 15 or 20 years, or even 30 years, the impact of these fees are spread over a longer period of time. And so it doesn't have as much impact on your true cost of funds, but you just increase your financing costs because you pushed out the financing term. Interest rates. Now, to talk about interest rates in the United States, you have to talk about the federal government. The federal government borrows money more cheaply than anybody in the world. And you have to look at it over a long period of time. And so here we're looking at it all the way back to 1950 until today. And if you go back to 1950, the United States government had $257 billion in debt outstanding. By 1971, that number had grown to $398 billion in debt outstanding. But a number of things occurred in 1971. One was we converted from the gold standard to what's called fiat currency, which is a fancy Latin term for let it be done. Essentially, we allowed the dollar to float. And during that time after 1971, we had the oil embargo. We built up our military. We got involved in 2 wars. We had a mortgage crisis, and now we've had the global pandemic. And today, our debt outstanding as a country is $31.4 trillion. Now, that may seem a little bit disconcerting, but keep in mind, we're borrowing money at 1 to 2% for most of this period. But back in 1980, we were borrowing money at 17 or 18%. The second thing to appreciate is U.S. monetary policy. And what is the strategy of the United States government? The strategy of the United States government is to keep interest rates low in this country. And if we do that, we can increase our debt. We can increase it with inexpensive debt. We can take the proceeds and invest it in people, plant, and equipment, the American people. We do our best to control inflation by controlling the supply of money, but we have external factors with other competing countries not interfering, but engaging in the marketplace. And then finally, population and employment. Back in 1950, the United States government, we had 150 million people that lived in this country. Today, we have 334 million people living in this country. And so if you ask the average American, what would they prefer to have? Low debt or a job, they're going to pick a job. And so as you can see, as your population rises, you keep the cost of capital low and you keep increasing your debt exposure to invest it back into your growing population. You do your best to control prices, but ultimately you want to have full employment. During the pandemic, our unemployment rate was 3.6% in December of 2019. By April of 2020, it went to 14.7%. Today, we're back to 3.6%. So the strategy, it may not look attractive, but America went back to work. To look at interest rates over the last 20 plus years, the green line represents the 20-year rate that investors like yourself receive, and the purple line represents the 1-year rate that the Federal Reserve Bank borrows capital at. And if you go back to January 1st of 2000, you can see we're roughly at 7%. But over the last 20 years, we have steadily declined in our interest rate. And when the purple line touches the green line, that's a recession. So this is the 07-08 mortgage crisis. And the United States government went into a crisis mode and began to lower interest rates to zero. And this is where they kept interest rates down. This was the beginning of the end of the Bush administration, all of the Obama administration. It went up a little bit during the Trump administration, and then it came down. During COVID, we went back to an emergency mode and we dropped rates back down to zero, and we kept rates down at zero for the next 2 years. And then in December, January of 2022, we began to rapidly raise interest rates. This is right before the pandemic. The green line, remember, is a 20-year rate, and the purple line is the 1-year rate controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank. The purple line was at 1.5%. It went to zero. We stayed at zero. And then eventually we began to fight inflation because there was too much inflation. We began to raise interest rates to counter inflation. Now the green line was at 2.25%. We went below 1%. We began to shelter in place. We began to receive federal stimulus dollars and look for a vaccine. We began to disseminate that vaccine, and now you can see the economy beginning to open, and there was a demand for capital. Here's the Delta variant, the Omicron variant, and now we have begun to fight inflation. So the bottom line is that interest rates have gone back up. And this slide really tells it all. Back in 1962, we were at 4 or 5% in interest rates. During the late 1970s, early 1980s, we hit 17, 18%. And then we went back down. But the point is, today, we're back in the 4 or 5% range. So you had an entire generation of people believing that 0% money was actually normal. 0% money is actually an emergency. Now I want to talk a little bit about interest rates and some options that you may have. And these are just examples, but let's say that the city wanted to borrow $10 million for a project. And he wanted to borrow the money for 10 years. And today the rate for all in everything is a 4.6%. Your annual payment is $1.25 million per year. If you spread that payment over 15 years, and this is an infrastructure asset, your payments are $936,000 a year. But you've just created an additional $322,000 of cash flow in your budget to do other projects or do another loan so you can buy that asset today with that $322,000 and get that asset at today's prices. And if you finance it over 20 years, you pay a slightly higher rate of 4.8, and your payments go down to $783,000. And then you created a $475,000 of additional cash flow in your budget every year. But here's a different strategy. let's say you have a growing population. And then I ask you, how much are your revenues growing per year? And hypothetically, you say, our revenues are growing $1 million. And then I ask you, of that $1 million, how much do you think you could allocate to your loan payment and incrementally increase it by a dollar amount every year? And you hypothetically said, I can increase my loan payment by $50,000 per year. So if you took that 20-year financing and you had that $783,000 payment, the next year would bump by 50,000 and another 50,000 and another 50,000 and all the way down to 2043. The question is, how much money could you borrow today? Instead of $10 million, you can get $14.88 million. So you pick up almost an additional $5 million if you have a growing population and your revenues are rising. You may say, well, what happens if I increase my payment by $100,000 a year? And if you did that, then you could borrow $19.9 million. So you can have more capital today to go out and buy more assets at today's prices. And if you continue to believe that America will have inflation, then you would try to buy your assets as quickly as you could to lock in that lower price. In closing, what is the Home and Capital Advantage? We endeavor to deliver to our clients world-class solutions. We offer public sector expertise, competitive rates, term loans, master financing agreements, a streamlined process, and quick funding. And that's pretty much everything. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council?
How do you address the security issue? You obviously take collateral for your loans.
Yeah, you can do one of three ways.
How do you foreclose on a sidewalk?
Say it again.
How do you foreclose on a sidewalk?
You take a pledge of the tax revenues. So you don't take the sidewalk as your collateral. You would take a building as your collateral. Or if it was an enterprise fund, you could take the water and sewer revenues as your security in the loan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you so much. That brings us to city department reports. I'm going to have Barb go first and share any other additional information you'd like to share about our memo.
Thank you. I appreciate it. As I said, this is a really brief summary. This is just regarding our finance payroll accountant. As Jean briefed you during your council retreat, Joan Norris is retiring after 17 plus years. During that process, we discussed whether or not it would make sense or it'd be feasible to share that payroll position with the sewer district. We kind of went through a discussion with MRSC and determined that the complexities of payroll are not something that we would want to do until we completely assume the sewer district, until they're fully assumed by the city. So that was kind of one of the things. And there is the response from MRSC in the paper. I'm not going to go through that for you, just to kind of so you have some information. As I mentioned in here, we did speak with Greg during a meeting as well, and he reiterated the same concerns. So at this time, we will not be going forward with that. There's no cost savings at this point. And so we will not look to do that until we have full assumption. And then the second portion is we want to go ahead and get this position posted and hired as soon as possible. So we have a little bit of overlap where we have the new payroll person working with our current payroll person as long as we possibly can, 6 to 8 weeks, we're hoping. We're working with HR to see what our timeline would be. We do believe there'll be salary savings from our current payroll person, as she's obviously top step and receiving longevity. So there should be some cost savings there, but this is so we can just hopefully ensure we don't have any issues with our payroll transition, and to hopefully keep as much experience and knowledge as we can from her through this process. So I just wanted to kind of keep council abreast. This is what we're going to go forward with doing. If you have any questions or anything else about that, let me know and I can go further into the detail, but just wanted to keep you apprised.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Barb? Thank you. I will turn it over to council retreat takeaways tracker. Is that you?
It is.
Right.
Last week, council asked to see a timeline and who's responsible for that particular item, and that is in your council pack this evening, and we'll be continually monitoring that and reporting out as progress.
Thank you. Any questions? Thanks. I will turn it over to Russ to talk about the long-range work program and the first quarter report.
Okay, great. Thank you, council. So as City Council Member Jorstad said, this would be our first report out on the commission's work program and the long-range work program for the city. This was a desire of the council last year to give this quarterly report. So what you see is we're basically on track for some of the projects this year. There are annotations of where we are at with the status, and any project that the timeline has been moved is shown as an underline when it's going to the Planning Commission and City Council. Happy to take any questions on the list.
Are there any questions from council? Great, thank you for your report, Russ. Moving on to playground status update and survey results, and that'll be Sarah.
Hey, let me share my screen. I have a short presentation to go over with you. Okay, perfect. So in my staff report, I gave a brief overview of where we're at in the process with playgrounds. This presentation is a supplement to the written information. So I'm just going to take you straight through the presentation and then let me know if you have any questions along the way or at the end. The Parks Department inspected all 14 of our playgrounds in February, and on February 22nd was the date that we put out a press release and closed 5 of our 14 playgrounds immediately that day for safety reasons. One of those was Mandolin Court that consisted of these 2 spring rockers. This location did at one point in the past have additional playground items added on it, but it has been reduced to this a few years ago. The other items were also depreciated. We have Summer Hills Estate, which has always consisted of this specific single tube component that you see. The largest one being talked about at the community level as well as internally with our department is the Oak Hill location. This play structure does not meet the standards for public playgrounds, which are a highly regulated industry. We have the Reserve 2, which we now know is called Greenwood Village 1, based on the HOA layouts. And then this is Greenwood Village 2. So those are the 5 that were closed immediately. The current status of all of the playgrounds are provided in your packet and shown here on the screen. 3 of the playgrounds had their components removed. That includes Mandolin Court, which has the spring rockers, Summer Hill, which had that single tube, as well as Reserve 2, also now known as Greenwood Village 1. That was a wooden structure that was beyond depreciation and was deemed not able to be repaired based on the amount of repairs that would have had to be made. The Greenwood Village 2 location, which was also made of wood, had every piece of hardware replaced and so some other repairs made, and that has successfully been opened back up to the public. The last one is Oak Hill, which stands closed today. That one is slated for replacement, and the city is working on plans for that now. Of the other playgrounds, needed repairs were made based on priority. There are some that still have parts on order and that have smaller repairs that still need to be made. And so we're just working through that process, mainly waiting on a lot of parts to be ordered. Parts can take up to 3 months, but everything is deemed safe and is open to the public other than the list provided. Public involvement. Following that press release and the action of closing playgrounds, we had a public playground meeting on March 2nd. It was hosted here in this room. It was available for in-person attendance as well as virtual attendance through Zoom. That meeting is recorded and is still available on YouTube today for anybody that wants to go back and watch it. Following that meeting, the day after, on March 3rd, we opened 6 separate surveys. Those were advertised to close on March 20th at 10 a.m. We officially closed them this morning as we realized we never toggled that button. So we had 3 additional surveys that came through for that. One of them was focused on a general citywide survey to really just get a feel for what do people want out of playgrounds across the city. And then a survey each for the locations that were closed so that we can start talking about their futures and planning. I compiled that data today. On the top of the screen, you can see how many responses we had for each of the locations. That was 148 responses on the general survey, 77 for Oak Hill, 13 for Summer Hills, 22 for the Reserve 2, also known as Greenwood Village 1. We had 6 responses for Greenwood Village 2, and unfortunately, no responses for the Mandolin Court location. Today, I'm going to take you just at a high overview of the general surveys that came back. We still will be looking at crunching all the data from the other ones. So how do people visit our parks as a whole? This shows how many people of the 148 survey takers keep in mind. So it is not a true sample of the entire city, but is a good snapshot. 7 of the responders did not visit, whereas 40 of your responders visit over 51 times a year. Over half of your respondents visit for more than an hour. Another 25% spend more than 30 minutes when they visit a playground. We asked people what's important to them and what should we be focusing on as a city for playgrounds. You can see here that people really do want that intergenerational play, meaning for all ages. Inclusive and accessibility were next. Nature play was 3rd, sensory 4th, and outdoor fitness equipment ranked 5th of our choices. More than half want us to focus on smaller playgrounds that people can easily access and get to. We asked people what type of play elements they want to see. Swings and slides continually will come in as top ranking surveys across the nation, and that reflects here. We also asked what other type of recreation is important to you throughout our parks. You can see here, I apologize for the colors as the system automatically duplicated 2 of the greens. However, trails was your top requested item at 107. People were able to pick 3 items when they chose out of these lists. Second was ranked as basketball courts, and the third was ranked as multi-use fields. Other things that we asked of importance on the survey was what type of surfacing do you want to see? Firm surfacing such as tile or pour in place was chosen. It is more expensive up front, but is easier on maintenance and does provide more protection. And we also asked, would people be willing to volunteer? It was interesting that we have a great bunch of people who will be volunteering soon in our parks. We'll be reaching out to them for upcoming volunteer days. On this survey, there were 68 individual typed out responses. Those are the ones we're going to have to quantify and crunch the data on. So people want to know what's next for our playgrounds. Parks Department is working on that. The most important piece was getting through that survey to understand what people desire from the playgrounds. We are actively working on that Oak Hill playground replacement, as mentioned before. If additional HOAs want meetings, I will happily schedule those. I have a new one that I'm scheduling. It'll be a virtual 6:30 meeting with just the HOA and me to make sure that the citizens affected with the closed playgrounds can discuss that with me. The Parks Department will be crunching all the survey data and be making recommendations as to where to go from here. That should be a process that will go through the Parks Planning Board and then come through to City Council is my plan. there any questions about the current status of playgrounds or the future of them?
I have one question that you may not be able to answer. Is there any update around conversations with the developer for the Oak Hill playground?
The city is working on that and we'll have something soon for
Great.
council.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Director Garceau. Much appreciated. That brings us to our consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved to approve the consent agenda amendment to the school resource officer interlocal agreement.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. That brings us to our public hearing this evening. We will be holding a public hearing on the 2023 comprehensive plan docket. Let me get my agenda in front of me. We are going to go ahead and open the public hearing and we'll begin with a staff report from Director Wright.
Okay, thank you, Council. Director Russ Wright for the City of Lake Stevens Community Development. So tonight we'll be holding the annual docket public hearing. What that action is council will review the recommendations from both the city and the community on items that they would like studied for this year. It's not a decision on any land use change. It's just looking at the merit for additional study. This year, there are 3 map amendments. 2 of those are city initiated. The first would be for the Cedarwood property, which the city acquired in 2021 for Parks and Rec purpose. Change that from public to public, semi-public. That is consistent with the comp plan that requires us to have all publicly owned properties be that designation. The second city initiated would be to revisit one of the properties off South Lake Stevens Road that was considered last year. During the course of last year's hearing, we found out that a property owner had purchased that property with an intent to use it for a commercial purpose as it had been designated. And they unfortunately weren't able to provide comment during the public hearing and the public process last year due to the timing of those different actions. So the city brought that back again this year for council's reconsideration. And then the third map amendment is a private map amendment that would be off of Lundin. And the request is to change the property from mixed use designation to a residential designation. The applicant had previously requested the current designation many years ago, and due to the significant encumbrances on the property, they would just like to hold it in the family and look at residential potential for that. So that's the other map amendment. And then there are the annual text amendments. This year is a minor update. So any amendments would be related to changes in the capital facilities plan. Not intending to do any changes to the land use or housing element other than, and then any other housekeeping amendments that would go along with the proposed changes. So those are the recommendations in front of the council tonight. Again, you are not taking any action to approve any of these changes. You're just setting a docket for this year for additional study. And I will say, because we have the 2024 comprehensive plan in front of us, we would like to accelerate this year's review of comprehensive plan matters and try to get this finished by July or so of this year, midsummer.
Thank you, Russ. Any questions of staff from council at this point? Thank you. I will now open the public hearing for public comment from the audience, and I will invite Rajesh to come to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm here to support the city initiated plan amendment M2. We purchased this property last year with intention to open a private Montessori school. This proposed capital expansion be it sewer line coming up and the high density zoning around it generally supports the need for a childcare facility, and Lake Stevens is already categorized as one of the childcare district. And we already run a private school in Linwood, and we live in Snohomish, so we thought Lake Stevens is a natural extension to our plans. We're a small, my wife runs the school, and we're not a big corporation, so we bought this property, which is commercially designated at the time of purchase. In the due course of applying for the permit in subsequent to the DCF granting application, we realized that it has been rezoned back to residential. So I'm here to gather support for the council members with the city support. Our intention is to set up a childcare facility that can support meet the regulations of the DCYF, which is hard to get by. There's no commercial property out there that any builder can build that can definitely meet the playground, parking, all the requirements that DCYF puts in, and that's cost prohibitive for a commercial builder who have a general commercial building in mind. So we want to build it more purpose-built for a preschool, and we believe this property in its size, and it is situated on the South Lake Stevens or main arterial road. It was an oversight from the last year docket where the intention was to rezone the 97th Drive properties, but my property was kind of an oversight, just happened to be clubbed along it, but I do not share 97th Drive. I was on the main street right next to the big commercial property. So that I would request the City Council Corporation to support the City Initiative Plan Amendment M2. Any questions?
Do we have a specific address for this?
9705 South Lake Stevens Road.
South Lake Stevens, okay.
Just a quick question. Will sewer be available for that property?
Not at this moment, but with the Costco capital expansion, the sewer now crossed the Highway 9. A little more context, if you allow me. We purchased this property because the Snohomish City Office of Recovery is granting a $2 million grant for any commercial expansion that is been up with for childcare expansions. So we intentionally purchased this property by applying for in the due course of the grant. Unfortunately, the rezone in the middle of the process, we spent a good amount of time and we had to pull back because one of the fundamental condition is that the city zoning must allow the childcare facility. So at the time when I bought the property, the time when we initiated the application, we were eligible for the $2 million grant, and every other criteria we met. We are a small business, not a chain, completely own the property, have the site control, 20 years commitment to the county. So our intention was to use that 22 million or a sum of it to extend a 100 feet line. We are 100 feet away from where the sewer was last dropped. And we thought that is natural and could have helped the rest of the proposed expansion. Unfortunately, we missed out the opportunity. Now we're falling back on planning with our own firms, but not right away. If this is it, probably we could have been opened a door for construction in the next 1 year, but we missed the grant and I have to look back and revisit my personal finance to see that. But expectation is that the high density zoning may not be me, but the HD zoning will bring it. If not, it's not too far away, 100 or 150 feet away.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Question, right?
Yeah.
Approximately how many students, what ages do you have?
We are on license from 2.5 to 6 years preschool, and that's where the shortage is, the childcare. And the plan was to build a full one-story commercial that allow us to put 70 kids, 75. However, there are some exceptions that we still need to go in terms of the parking requirements. City of Lake Stevens have one of the most restrictive requirements where you ask one parking slot for every 5 kids, plus again one for every teaching staff. That is very prohibitive. We know there are processes in place to seek exemptions because the rest of the cities around the county itself have 10-1, the city have 5-1. So our plan was to set up a 75, expand 75 childcare slots, and with 2 apartments on top of. Our goal is to create an an intentional support for the teachers to retain so that they can live there and work. So we want to be a little more creative, and the commercial designated zoning could have perfectly blend that low cost housing for the staff, and that is important for me to retain the staff, 2 apartments and 1 commercial. So all under the name of the school.
Thank you. And what is the current deficit? Like Stevens, so you said the 2.5 to 7, there's a deficit like Stevens. What is that current deficit?
I do not have the exact numbers, but DCYF, Department of Child, Youth and Welfare, had a criteria of which cities are considered as childcare deserts, which means lack of childcare and relative growth to the current and future population. Lake Stevens is one of it. And Snohomish and Lake Stevens are the 2 cities are classified as childcare desert. That is actually the reason why they're extending the leftover funds to support childcare.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments regarding to the 2023 comprehensive plan docket?
Council President, can I ask about online? I do have a few
Please.
people. Okay, if you're online and would like to make a comment or public comment on the comp plan docket hearing, please raise your digital hand. I do have 1 phone number ending in 1219. If you did want to speak on this topic, hit *9 and I will allow you to speak. Not seeing anything. I just want to give them an opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that. All right, any further public comment? Okay, thank you. We'll close the public comment portion of the hearing. Any further comments by Director Wright?
Just briefly, all of the items in your packet tonight, they have been reviewed against the basic criteria for docketing. All of them show that they warrant further review. They have been reviewed by the Planning Commission, who has also put forward a recommendation to set this year's docket for additional study. So then just looking for action tonight from the council to approve the resolution.
Thank you, Russ. Any further questions for Russ from the council?
So Russ, my question, thank you for your report. So what action would be necessary to, if we were to entertain granting the request that we've heard tonight? What would that look like?
So you just need to adopt resolution 2023-03 that would set the comprehensive plan docket. The items we've discussed are included as exhibits to that resolution. So it's just adopting the resolution.
Any other questions for staff?
Russ, just out of curiosity, the Chapman property was originally zoned as multifamily. Do you have any idea how many units would have been generated on that site?
The current designation is mixed use, not multifamily.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
And no, I don't have an estimate right now, but that would be part of the further review that will analyze what would be the change based on either a commercial footprint or residential footprint.
Yeah, kind of northeast of, I just, yeah.
It's right next to those that small apartment complex.
Yeah, exactly. I just, interesting, we don't get too many requests to downzone property.
No.
And so I'm just curious as to what kind of density we are losing. There was a provision before the legislature that if density was lost, it could be replaced with an expansion of the urban boundary. I don't know if that has actually moved forward. House Bill 11 something, probably didn't. But it's just kind of an interesting situation that we're losing density, I guess, on developable property. So
I will be prepared with answers to that if this moves forward.
okay, thank you.
Any further questions or deliberation among council? Do we have a motion?
I move to adopt resolution 2023-03 to set the 2023 comprehensive plan docket.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes, resolution is adopted. I didn't close the public hearing. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing at this moment. Great. It's closed. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. Moving forward on our agenda, we move to discussion items. The first item that we have in front of us is discussion around short-term rentals. I just want to open by saying that we have an opportunity before us tonight to review the ordinance that's been put forward by the subcommittee that we as a council asked to do this work. We have comments from council regarding that draft ordinance, and I would like to propose that we go through those comments one by one to determine if there is appetite from the council to amend the ordinance based on those comments. We have 40 comments or 40 different points that we'll be going through, although there is some overlap. And so my goal would be that we be expeditious in our conversation and comments around those points and determine if there is need to move forward. This is not an exercise to come up with the perfect ordinance for any of us. I think it is an exercise to once and for all look at the draft that we have, consider the final comments, make decisions about moving forward and how to move forward, and return that information to staff so that they can bring forth an ordinance for us to vote on. I'm going to turn this over briefly to Director Wright, just to see if there are any comments before we get started.
Okay, thank you once again. So as we move through this tonight, I did include in the staff report the chronology of events and different actions that have been taken by different groups along the way. As Council President Jorstad mentioned, we had opened this up to the council a few meetings ago to provide specific written comments. Council President Jorstad took those and compiled those, trying to sort of truncate those comments to some actionable items. I've spent a little bit of time going through that condensed list. Anywhere that you see the word response with some text after it, that is, staff's thought on how you can move forward with some of those items or provide specific history on how some of those points came to be. So with that said, I'm happy to try to provide any guidance as it relates to code writing and how we're trying to make the connections with other portions of code, and then just follow the council directions tonight to come to a final draft that you would be comfortable with, or at least a set of agreed upon components to move forward with.
Thank you, Director Wright.
Can I ask a quick question, just so I'm working off the same document? The lady that spoke earlier talked about a document, I think that was 5 to 7 pages. And I noticed on the document that we have on page, it starts on page 39 of our packet and goes page 40, and page 41, it talks, the first item is item number 3, 4, 5, 6. And then it jumps to item 9 and 10. Are we missing 7 and 8 somewhere that would expand this document beyond the 5 pages that I have?
7 and 8 are missing. I have the hard copy. I have another copy that has items 7 and 8 on it, and those are missing. So yes, you're correct.
So you do have a different document than what's on the.
Correct.
Oh, wonderful.
What section is that?
It's on the 3rd page of our packet. It's page 41.
Thank
And
you.
it'd be the 3rd page of the proposed citizen amendments, I
It's
guess.
C7 and 8 are missing.
Thank you.
So are they lengthy?
It's about a quarter of the page. It's about providing the section that, under penalty of perjury, that section. So I don't know if that whole section, was,
So there's more to it than what's on this. I mean, that section is on here. In item,
I think it's just a Scrivener's error in how the numbering was moving forward. It goes from 6 to 9. There's nothing missing in your packet.
So it should go 6, 7, 8 instead of 6, 9, 10.
Right.
what the heck am I? I'm mistaken. I was in section B instead of section C, so I'm mistaken.
Thank you, Councilmember Ewing.
so there is no section 9 and 10. That should be 7 and 8 then.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Does everyone feel comfortable proceeding in the way that I described, or are there any other requests to do it differently?
I'm comfortable with that, and I thank you for taking the time to summarize the comments, and that was helpful for me.
And I would agree with that. The only question I have is, there was 3 of us that commented on this draft ordinance. So my assumption is that the other 4 folks, council members that didn't respond, is that they are in agreement with this draft.
I can speak for myself. I would have been prepared to vote on the draft without changes.
Okay.
Well, as part of the STR subcommittee, yes, I didn't have any issues with it as it was written. I certainly don't have any issues with some of the changes that are in here. Those are open to discussion. I'm open to discussing this. Like I said, a week ago or so, I'm not married to this, but we did quite a bit of work on the STR committee and put forth what we thought was good. We have some other brains that put their thoughts down, and there you go. Let's discuss it.
Thank you.
That's why we have 7 people on the council.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with comments that were provided by Councilman Donahue. Thank you. The first comment is in section A, subsection 1, regarding covenants, conditions, or restrictions applicable to the owner's residential dwelling unit. So the last sentence in section 1. The comment was wanting to make sure the city council is aware that would be allowing entities like HOAs to prohibit STRs in certain parts of Lake Sweden.
So briefly on this one, I'll just say, I'm not necessarily opposed to the language. I just wanted to flag it and make sure that we were knowingly including that. And if we are, then that's fine.
Any concerns or wishes to make any changes to the draft ordinance in this area?
I have a question about that for legal. If we have an ordinance in the city, it doesn't matter what that ordinance is. If an HOA decides to be more restrictive, is that outside the bounds?
Well, if an HOA has a covenant, say that prohibits a certain or with a structure of some kind or number of cars that they can be parked in a driveway, which is one that we just had. That will supersede their rule, yes, will supersede our restrictions in our code.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, just to be more clear on that, if we wanted to be more proactive in asserting our authority as a city council, we could preempt that though, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, right. In our development approval process, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So the way it stands now, HOAs can have covenants that prohibit STRs regardless, or that change, that set their own rules for their HOA regardless of what this ordinance says.
Our HOA has restrictions that are more significant than what the city has, and that's our HOA's prerogative. And so they can be more restrictive. We can't allow something that city prohibits, but we can be more restrictive.
Yeah, or for example, I mean, we don't generally have codes that restrict people's renting out their property. Whereas different subdivisions do and will.
Right. Okay, thank you.
This is Marcus here. Almost all HOAs have that restriction in them nowadays.
Yeah, I think this is an easy one. I just wanted to flag it so we can consider it
Okay,
taken care of.
we'll keep it as is. Moving on. The next comment is in section B, item 3. Maximum total of short-term rental licenses allowed at any one time shall be 30, no more than 10, which shall be within waterfront residential zoning district. The comment is not in favor of having a separate cap for the area around the lake. And in general, that a bifurcated system sends the wrong message to the public in view of Lake Stevens' one community around the lake slogan. There are there's some additional comments that Russ provided to us regarding B3 that you all have in front of you and can take into consideration as well. Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I apologize for jumping the gun. I think probably a more important motivation behind this comment is also, bearing in mind what we discussed at our retreat and conversations we've had. I can easily imagine other areas of the city developing and becoming potential desirable locations. And so in addition to, keeping the entire city on one system, I would like to consider at least mechanisms for controlling STR density that we could apply to the whole city and that would kind of future-proof it against any areas that might be subject to development, keep us from having to come back and say, now this area is a hotspot, we need a cap here. Now this one's a hotspot, we need a cap here. If we could control it with, an overall permit cap and some kind of density language like we already have in there, that may be preferable.
So what are your thoughts? So the 1 per 40 is what the lakefront homeowners have requested. So if we apply that to the 14,800 whatever units we have, 720 units or roughly, I'm math's a little off there, but we could come up with something that's that same percentage for the rest of the lots. I mean, or if we want to have, a different number. But having a third of the lots for 400 lots of the 14,800 that we have in the city just doesn't seem like a good fit.
Can we ask those people attending virtually to please mute your microphones? Thank you. So I think we have 2 different items on the table. The issue that's been brought up is whether there should be a separate cap for the lakefront. And then we will also talk about the total number of licenses for the city. Let's talk about the lakefront first. Is there appetite from the council to revisit this issue? Currently, the ordinance does have separate caps for lakefront property versus the rest of Lake Stevens.
I would suggest that the lakefront property owners or properties, I guess I should say, would probably be more heavily impacted than the rest of the community if it were allowed to be unrestricted. I would fall back to I guess we'll call it the citizen committee, even though there was planning commissioners and city council people on there, as to the rationale or the reasoning for that recommendation. I guess I would, in response to Councilmember Donahue's comments, I guess if for some reason we had a hot spot in the city that were to develop that identifies a crisis of STRs, then we would bring that forward, or the citizens would bring it forward. And certainly let you know about it as what has happened previously. So I would support the 30, the 10 designation. Right now we have 23 throughout the city. I think the number is STRs. 1 is regulated, 22 are not registered or unregulated.
Do we know how many of those are lakefront properties?
Not factually, but I think it's been spoken about 3 or 4 of them.
Okay, thank you.
One of the counts we had was 8.
8, okay.
But it's not, it's not proven.
Sure.
One of the counts that was at our committee was 8. One of the other things I'd like to mention is that part of what our discussion was during our deliberation about, to your point about one community around the lake. There's a couple of different things in there. One is that the lakeshore property owners pay more in taxes than everybody else, by design. And they also have other regulations that are put on them, in their zone that everybody else doesn't have to do. So there is precedence in that, and we're still one community around the lake, as far as my opinion. I understand where you're coming from on that, but there are differences for the people who live around the lake. They have more onerous things that they have to put up with than anybody else, so.
I would suggest also that the amount of subdivisions that have been developed in the city in the last 10 years, the vast majority of those have HOAs and CCNRs in particular. There are no CCNRs or HOA for the lakefront property owners. It falls back on city code. So that's the protection, I guess, you're looking to provide. And through that limitation, I think that addresses that.
So to clarify in light of those comments, I agree with both of you that there are issues where the lake is separate and that as it stands, those properties would likely bear the brunt of this. I'm just trying to think if there's going to be protections put in place for those properties, do we want to consider a system that applies similar protections to anywhere else where they might, become subject to increased desire for STRs?
Well, I think that the citywide cap answers that, right away.
Right.
And then if, we're supposed to come back and review this once in a while. I mean, if the staff starts getting license requests above the 30, then we need to, come back and look at it again and say, are we going to go above 30 or aren't we? That's going to address hotspots at the same time.
Yeah, and I guess that's essentially the basis of my comment is, do we handle it that way, or do we try and, control it with a density requirement to get in front of that? And I'm not necessarily saying one way is better than the other. I mean, I'm open to this, but those are the two paths as I see them.
Well, there's already a density requirement in there. I mean, that's essentially going to severely limit it. I mean, you go 500 feet, the current language between property. I mean, you're really going to significantly restrict the number of folks that can have it anyway. So you probably don't even need a cap with that because between the HOAs that already exist that prohibit that. And with that density, most of our housing in the city, especially the new stuff, there's a high density. That 500 feet is going to be my neighborhood. I have 56 homes on we have 3 different developers in our 136 HOA. We have 56 in ours. If there was one STR in our neighborhood and the 500 feet would cover the entirety of the 56 lots. So there would only be one allowed in our neighborhood, in our section.
I'm going to attempt to move us along on this issue regarding lakefront caps. Can we just have a show of hands of those folks who would like to see that language eliminated from the ordinance?
President?
Yep.
If we raise the cap for the entire city, I'm comfortable with the 10 based on the number of lots that's there and the restrict. But if we are going to limit it to 30, then that's problematic. I just doesn't make sense to have a 1-40 ratio for the lakefront homeowners and a 1-720 for the rest of the city. It's not balanced.
So we could go the other direction and say none on the lake and 30 in the city.
So what number 700 and some odd is kind of like, wow. So what number are you proposing?
Well, I put it in my notes. So the part, and I'll just tell you my big rub, the 2 biggest rubs that I have are. And I'll just quote from my notes here to make sure I'm saying correctly. Kim Daughtry suggested eliminate to 10 and 30. Rick Trout and Mike Dewar, they supported that. Rick Trout and Connor Davis suggested 50. There was no deliberation, 0 deliberation on that. And then the report comes back at 30. 0 deliberation. That's my rub. Same thing with the housing density or the density, 500 feet, 250. There was discussion supported by a planning commissioner and a citizen at 250. Kim Daughtry and a planning commissioner at 500. 0 discussion, 0 debate, no compromise. And then I come back and get the note saying it's at 250 or it's at 500. So the fact that some discussion occurred after the meeting for it to be restricted, that's my problem. There was no debate, there was no recording to support that, but my notes will support that, and that's why I attended the meeting, because I wanted to have an accurate assessment of
So-
what took place.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back to the cap. If the cap were 50, would you be in support of not having a lakefront number? I think just to answer Gary's question.
You know what, if
that
they went
wasn't-
to-
That wasn't my question. My question was the 30 minus 10, those 20, what, when you get down to his ratio?
I see.
If they went to 10, somewhere between 10 to the lakefront, which I can support. And they went to 40 to 50 on the other stuff, I'd totally be supportive of that. You know, limiting it to 20 for the remainder of the city is just, doesn't seem reasonable to me.
So 10 around the lake and 40 outside of the lake for a total of 50 in the city is something that you would, is a compromise
I
you
would
would be
support, and it
comfortable
was
with.
supported by a planning commissioner, Connor Davis, who spoke tonight, and the only STR owner that was on that subcommittee.
I would support that. I think the rationale, I think, was the basis for 2 to 3 bedrooms per STR, and they were figuring there was 30, and what would it be about, at least from my recollection, what it would equate to a hotel in the city was about 100-unit hotel. And so you're talking about 150-unit hotel. Within the realm of reason, that seems reasonable, I guess. So,
Reasonable to me too.
yeah, so I would support.
I would support that as well.
Okay,
So,
Right.
and yeah, so 10 lakefront and
40
for
additional.
the rest of the city,
with it for a total of 50,
for a total of 50.
correct?
And I would just add that, I mean, I will defer to the more experienced council members if they believe that, you know, the density requirement and the HOA distribution is sufficient to provide similar protections. I will trust that judgment and I'd be okay with that.
Thank you.
Success.
Moving on. The next comment provided by Councilman Donahue is in number 7. Regarding the language, a signed statement made under penalty of perjury. There are questions around what is the signed statement? And why does it require this language? Does it refer to the attestation? I'm gonna pull up Russ's comments really quick.
And actually, this one might be a quick one in view of Director Wright's comments. So it's my understanding the penalty of perjury language will be removed. I don't know if Director Wright, is that, am I, okay.
Correct.
And then he also provided clarification what that statement is. So if we could just amend the ordinance language to make that more clear in the text, then I'm fine with that.
Anyone opposed to that?
I don't have that up right now. What is the proposed language that you attest to what you are reporting is true and accurate? Is that what?
Yeah, the comments I just said, the signed statement as described would require a factual statement by the owner to self-certify delivery of notice to neighbors of the short-term rental application. And that's also tied to future conversation we'll have about the permit type. But essentially, the idea of perjury, that was too strong of language, and both the planning commission and city council have already recommended taking that out, and it doesn't change the effect or the intent of this ordinance, just looking for self-certification by an applicant that they've met a criteria of compliance.
Right, but if they knowingly provide false statements and attest to false information,
That would go to the enforcement process, which could result in revocation of permits.
is that statement going to be on there?
I believe it's already embedded within other parts of our code.
Okay, I don't, it's just interesting. I mean, we have a statement of ownership applicant authority. It says I certify or declare under the penalty of perjury under the laws of the state of Washington that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I guess I would say if we're going to do that, we should probably go back and do a little wordsmithing on the rest of our documents throughout the city. most applications that you sign for land use activities, you attest that you're providing true and accurate information.
Mhm.
And the penalty is revocation of that permit or whatever. So
So
consistency.
are you suggesting that that be included in all of our applications for consistency?
Certainly. I mean, why do we have the language in one versus the other?
I would support that.
Yeah, so.
Agreed. Mhm. Okay, so it seems we have consensus to strike that language and Russ is gonna replace it with
Yes.
language that's more consistent. Okay. So I think that takes care of the next couple of comments. Councilman Donahue, I believe, sections in number 7 and in number 8, is that correct?
Correct. It's a similar issue, just there's the term review process. And so if we could just make it clear in those instances what review process we're referring to, then yes.
Great, thank you. Next question, the next comment is in section 9 by Councilman Donahue regarding wanting to provide specific Lake Stevens Municipal Code sections in that sentence where it says other applicable sections of the LSMC, that you would like those other applicable sections spelled out. Is that correct?
I would say there's a balance to be struck here, perhaps some key sections before we resort to that catch-all, just to help applicants know what they need to prepare and make their applications accurate in advance. Hopefully giving them guidance, saving us some review work, and then saying all other applicable sections.
Thank you. Director Wright, in his feedback, states that there is additional language that can be added that would specify certain sections of the municipal code, but keeping it short helps decrease the risk of inconsistencies when there are future code updates. So it sounds like that's what you're saying, is find that balance between.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with Director Wright's comments.
Any other comments or concerns around Director Wright finding a balance between adding additional applicable LSMC codes, but not ad nauseum?
Well, as a practical matter, he's going to have to evaluate the applications consistent with the code. And you'll probably have a list of those. He could include them here if you know what they are.
Well, in my response, I did highlight a few. So my language would say other sections of the Lake Stevens Municipal Code, including but not limited to chapter 404, business licenses and regulations. We know that it's business license. Chapter 806, utility service, which for occupancy, so they have to show they have adequate water sewer to the site. Chapter 9.56 and 960, noise control and nuisance activities. Title 14, the land use code, and Title 17, the uniform enforcement code are really the biggies. And I chose to use including but not limited to get back to they're required to follow the entire code, but these would be likely sections of code that would come into play.
Right. And to the burden is on Russ here. It's not on the citizen applicant. What do I have to put on this to be able to, this section puts a burden on Russ to make sure that his decision-making is code compliant.
Sorry, and I just want to clarify when you say not on the citizen, because I was imagining this is someone who's not familiar with the code, reading this, seeing that term and thinking, what other sections? What do I need to do?
This tells Russ what he needs to do.
Does it not serve both? Would it not tell the citizens what other parts of the code they need to be in compliance with?
No.
Oh,
No, not really.
okay. My reading, then perhaps I misread it. That was my concern, so I leave it to Director Wright to find the best balance.
Thank you. Any other input? Moving to section 10, subsection 4. The comment is in regard to updating current contact information annually upon renewal of the license. The question is, do we need to explicitly require this as part of the annual renewal? It seems like we could delete the subsection because the requirement is already covered in section B, section 4, subsection I, that contact information has to be updated if it changes.
Correct. So, yeah, B4.1 gives a 2-week window regarding any changes to provide notification. And so I just was wondering if there was any reason to require that annually, if it has to be done anyway upon a change within 2 weeks.
I don't have a problem with
What about in the event of a sale of the property?
Seems like that would be a change in the contact. And that's addressed that if there's a change in contact, that has to be changed at the city within 14 days.
The license doesn't transfer and that's covered.
Got license as a transfer.
Well, when people get their licenses, that's probably a pretty good time that they're gonna be looking at that information to see if it's current and up to date, because you're no doubt gonna have people who missed that 2 week. And it's just another way to make sure people are providing the city with correct information. So yeah, it's a bit duplicative because if people are complying with the other section, it's not going to be necessary, but you're going to have those people who haven't complied with the other section, and they're not going to have an excuse if they get their new license and it's got wrong information on it. So I think that's probably why it's there. At least it would serve that purpose anyway.
And really, for we could, at the end of it, it says any change in the contact must be submitted to the department and adjacent property owners within 14 days of the change. And we could just add very simply there, and upon license renewal.
I think that would simplify the direction. Is everyone in agreement of that change? Okay, moving on. Section C, number 1, general operating requirements. Short-term rentals must be occupied by the short-term rental operators of primary residence for at least 240 days in a calendar year. The comment from Councilman Donahue, although this is something that had multiple comments. Did we ultimately decide owner occupancy was a requirement that we could legally impose under case law? So I'm going to stop there and defer.
Right, we're not making the owner of the property responsible, because they don't have to be the operator. The operator can be someone who's representative, an employee or whatever of the actual owner of the property. So that problem with the Fifth Circuit case was that they required the actual owner of the property. And for those out-of-state owners, that presented a problem. We're not creating that problem here. And the Ninth Circuit has said that this type of provision is okay.
Because we're using the phrase rental, short-term rental operator.
Operator.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Second point asks why we need owners or owner operators outside the LSUGA to occupy 240 days a year. With a citywide permit cap, is that not enough to specify an owner living outside the LSUGA can't use the home for STR 240 days a year? Or inversely, use it for an STR for 125 days a year? Are there any legal prohibitions on directly limiting the number of days a residence can be used for an STR?
So I might be able to paraphrase this a little bit. The two issues I saw this subsection identifying were corporations buying up housing stock, and then also unsupervised, largely unsupervised STR rentals. And so it seemed to me there were provisions in here that would address both of those. So I was wondering why we had a requirement that the property must be used as a primary residence 240 days of the year. Is it simply not enough that we restrict the time period for which it could be used as an unsupervised STR? That makes more sense.
So are you suggesting we would flip this regulation on its head and say
So essentially, instead of saying you have to live there 240 days, and then the other 125, you can let whoever you want STR it as long as you have a local contact, just say you have 125 days where you can do it unsupervised with a local contact, regardless of whether or not the person is actually using it as a primary residence the other 240 days. That was the part that seemed perhaps a little overly burdensome to me, is that the person must live there for 240 days. When we're
So I just interject. So the conversation, like, how is that enforceable? I mean, that's the enforceability component. It's the same thing with the kids in the bedroom. We're going to put a camera in the bedroom to verify that they have no more than 2 children there. We're going to have surveillance at the property to make sure it's not being used. I mean, what mechanism are we going to use to monitor that? I mean,
I don't think we are going to be monitoring that. I think the impacted neighbors would probably be monitoring that and saying, gosh sakes, this STR has been operating all year round. And that's where code compliance comes into place. We're a citizen initiated code compliance city. So the city isn't actively going to go out there and regulate that. It would be up to the existing. And that's part of the reason why notification, in my belief, is important to the surrounding, the impacted neighborhood, so that I'm not asking them to police that, but if there's something that's not happening in accordance with the code, that they have the opportunity to have that knowledge and say, hey, city, these people are operating an STR 365 days a year. Then the city can go into the code compliance mode
let me-
and enforce that.
One sort of point of clarification, through the advisory committee, the goal was not to limit it to only that 125 days. It was to be allowed year round, 365 days a year. It could be used for short-term rental. It just established that there was a person that used that facility as a primary residence, acting as a caretaker, an on-site manager, et cetera, to control the potential for unwanted behaviors. So it was just in the planning commission, speaking for the planning commission, not here speaking for the advisory committee. Again, it's just that first point of control, that there is someone with authority in that residence to control the situation, respond to complaints, be that person like your concierge at your hotel or whatever. There's just that presence, and to not be overly onerous. We understand people have commitments, they travel, they have family, so they can go away for a portion of the year and not be in the residence, and they will appoint a local contact person who then takes on their responsibility to be the facilitator, the property manager, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. I misunderstood that. Thank you.
So Russ, I want to just clarify, so that designated contact does not need to physically live at the residence.
Correct.
But they need to be available to respond to any complaints that come.
Correct.
I guess, okay, thank you for that clarification.
And so that's for 125 days of the year. So as it's written, the other 240, someone has to be living with that as their primary residence. And so what I'm saying is, if you give them 125 days where they can, have an STR with a local contact, and then you could even do it on an ad hoc. So say they want an extra 5 days, they have to be there for days 126 through 130 on the premises, rather than saying you have to live here 240 days out of the year, otherwise you're in violation.
I'm not following.
Yeah.
I'm not following that either. I'm trying to figure out why we can't just say we only have 23 right now, never had a complaint. Why not just let them be able to operate it 365 days out of the year and have the contact person? But I don't think they need to live on site. I think that's overburdening someone. Maybe it's someone's house that mom and dad had and they want to keep it in the family.
I just want to make sure we're all clear. There only has to be someone living on site for 240 days unless the owner operator has a primary residence within the Lake Stevens UGA.
Right.
So if that's the case, then that's not a requirement.
Yeah, I apologize. So I'm setting that scenario aside. I'm saying if I've got somebody who lives in another state, what we're currently saying is 240 days out of the year, they have to be in that residence. And then they get,
They're represented.
or Well, so as it's written, the representative only works for 125 days out of the year. The other 240, it says they have to use it as their primary residence. And that's the part I'm stuck on.
The it says the short-term rental operator.
Operate.
So it doesn't have to be the
Owner
owner.
and the operator do not have to be the same.
But
And when they're absent, a local contact, the local contact can be the owner, can be the operator or someone.
okay, so point taken, but I guess I'm still wondering why we have to require anyone to use it as a primary residence at all. You know, if it seems we could satisfy the concerns by saying you only get so many days of, you know, a local contact supervising it offsite, and then the permit cap will control corporations coming and buying up housing stock.
Well, I guess the theory behind this was we want some responsible person who can take care of problems, complaints, and if there's a loud workers' party going on, then please know who to contact. And they're going to be there to be able to handle the issue. So this particular provision is in furtherance of that. We expect that there's going to be an operator who generally resides at the place, but we're not going to make you live there, be there 365 days days a year. And these are primarily going to be people that don't live in the area, because we've added this exception that if you are right here, if you're in our UGA, then you don't have to occupy them. So this is for those people that aren't local, that you've got to have somebody generally here to become local. And so it's an enforcement issue. It helps the city with enforcement, the police with enforcement. And that's the idea. This 240 days, not a magic number, but it's a number I think that I've seen in a number of ordinances that has kind of somewhere along the line gotten picked out and seems to be working for jurisdictions.
And so I'm completely in favor, you know, we've carved out that 125 days where it can be a local contact. Anything above that, if we want to require someone, you know, operator on the premises, I'm okay with that too. What I'm thinking of is if those other 240 days, I only have an STR party in there, 30 of them. Why does anyone have to use it as a primary residence for the other 210? That doesn't make sense to me. If there's no STR there, there's no need to oversee the property. There's no noise being generated, no traffic. Why do you need somebody there?
I see. Thank you. That clarification is helpful.
I was just thinking in my head how that would work. That if we required there to be somebody there when it's rented, I suppose you could have language such as that.
So that if you're not using it as an STR, there isn't a requirement that the owner occupy the home.
Correct.
I wouldn't be for putting a cap on how many days out of the year someone can rent or short-term rental of their property. Why wouldn't we only have maybe 23? And it's kind of a use of a hotel. What we just talked about is 150 unit, theoretically speaking. Why would we limit someone's ability to lease this property out if that's what they wanted and they have the ability to do so?
Yeah, Marcus, we're not we're not suggesting there be a cap. At this point, a person could rent it out 365 days a year. It's just that they would have to occupy the residence for 240 of those 365 days.
Their operator.
The operator.
Yeah.
So
The point that's being made though is that they may not do it, you know, for several months. They may not use it as an STR. So why are we requiring them to be there? Well, actually, I guess you're not. I mean, if they're not renting it and they want to go on vacation, they go on vacation. If they're renting it, if they rented it every day for 365 days a year, and it's always a short-term rental, less than 30 days, then the 240 is a requirement.
Russ, is it possible to add language that specifies that? So
I don't know what to do.
must be occupied by the short-term rental operator as a primary residence at least 245 days a calendar year while the unit is being used as a short-term rental?
Yeah, that's easy.
Would that?
Yeah, essentially what I'm trying to avoid is someone having to be on site.
Yep.
for a portion of the year where there's no STR party there because there's nothing to monitor.
Okay,
Or we can just, the requirements are the same regardless of whether it's owner occupied or it's a designated agent or contact person. So the rules are the same. So why are we, if the expectation is that they comply with the rules of the STR, I'm not sure why we think that. I mean, my expectation is that the agent provide the same level of care as the owner, and the assumption is that, hey, they're not going to provide that level of care based on what I'm hearing here, that there's going to be a different level. There may be, but you know, we have to remember we have one documented code enforcement case in, you know, the years that this has been discussed. And so, you know, I think that's important for us to consider. I'm with Marcus. If they want to rent it 365 days, they have an authorized agent. You know, I think I've a rub with the UGA because that's just restrictive. I can tell you from a property management standpoint, there's no requirement for a property manager, either of homes or of any other units, that they live in the same city or the UGA where it's done. I mean, that just is not practical.
okay, we'll get to that comment in a minute. I want to make sure that we all have consensus that adding language that states that the owner or operator does not need to be on site if they're not operating the residence as a short-term rental. That addresses everyone's concerns and
Time it's not rented.
during the time it's not rented.
Makes sense, makes good sense.
Okay. I'm going to keep on trucking with Councilman Donahue's comments.
Jeez, Donahue.
We are going to under C, general operating requirements, number 2. Short-term rentals shall be located where they shall be located, and they cannot be located over water, either partly or wholly. The comment is it possible to have a legal conforming residential dwelling unit partially over the water? And does this need to be revised to exclude any home on the water? We have some comments from Director Wright.
So this one's really easy to handle.
Thank
So
you.
Our shoreline master program and our municipal code, they do prohibit overwater structures for residential use. That would be partial or entirely.
Right.
If the assumption is that we are prohibiting some that might otherwise have standing, that's not the case. You know, that would be some of these undefined codes that we don't necessarily enumerate, but there's non-conforming code that we would evaluate, you know, if they have a vested right. So we can easily add just language that refers to unless determined to be legally non-conforming, in which case we would allow them to continue that defined use.
Okay, thank you.
Work. Any further comments on that area? Thank you. Section 3, no more than 2 guests excluding children under 6 are permitted per bedroom. The comment seems overly restrictive and virtually impossible to enforce. Some suggestions: could we remove the language about children, and if possible, tie maximum bedroom or dwelling occupancy to some other established occupancy standard, building construction, health, etc.
So this is one of the more complex issues, even though it seems pretty simple. As we went through an audit of other codes, some cities did say per fire district requirements. As you dig into the International Residential Code, there are no occupancy requirements for residential units because the definition of family is so broad, and the variety of federal protections that come along with sort of that residential use. We don't have an occupancy number. So we've looked at what other, you know, communities have done. Some of them have based it on, you have your, you know, sort of in a nuclear type family. You know, you have mom, dad, kids, and they can share a bedroom. Other things we've looked at would just be a cap on the party number. You could also say an overall cap of persons without any distinction. So the language as put forward is definitely not the only model. Like I say, this one has become more of a complex issue than at face value you think that it may need to be.
Okay, thank you. And really I think my biggest concern here was the specification of the number of children. That just to me, I mean, who's going to evaluate that? Are we going to have neighbors counting kids as they walk through the door and reporting that? I mean, it seemed impractical.
But the idea of excluding children was to make sure, small children was to ensure that, a small family, a husband and wife and a couple kids, and maybe there's only one bedroom. They're going to be able to use the facility. So it's more inclusive rather than exclusive by adding that language. I mean, if you had a family of 12 people, I mean, parents and 10 kids, varying ages, that's obviously they're going to need more than one bedroom. So, this language is generated out of that. We don't want to be able to exclude that, a young family with one or two kids, small children, because it's a limited bedroom. So, but as Russ says, this is wide open how you might want to.
Even to the point of striking 3 entirely, is relying on 4, which just said no more than 2 rental parties. And then that leaves it open to sort of interpretation or the city working with the applicant to say, well, how many bedrooms do you have? And, so it does leave it a little bit more open, but it's not critical, and not every STR ordinance has that specification.
I was just gonna say, from the enforcement standpoint, if it does come to a situation where the police department or code enforcement officer comes out to the place, specificity gives that person some confidence in what they're doing and what they're saying. If we have generalities what does that mean? That makes their job difficult.
Correct. No one's going to, the police will not have a warrant to have authority to go into their house. If someone calls and said there's noise, the police will not be able to get a warrant to go in and inspect the house. Like the resident is not required by law to answer the door when code enforcement or law enforcement shows up. So I don't understand why we put something in there that's unenforceable. I mean, that's my deal. If it's not enforceable, I don't want the neighbors standing there. We've had neighbors that are like that in our HOA that do that. They literally will have a camera and they'll snap pictures of stuff and they'll send it in and want it to be enforced. And I see this being weaponized. And it's really difficult to enforce.
I agree with your comments, city attorney, but I guess I would support striking number 3 and talking about no more than 2 short-term rental parties can occupy the short-term rental at any time. I think that's a little more effective and a little more able, right below it.
Maybe if we define what I don't know, what's a party? That's.
I think it's one of the definitions.
That's 2 renters right? Is that?
Yeah, short-term rental party, the definition is an overnight guest or group of renters renting the short-term rental for a specified period of 1 or more nights, but less than 30. And then it does include visitors, which we should probably revisit that. But it doesn't give a cap.
Yeah.
Again, if we were to put a cap in, if we just wanted a numeric cap, we could use 6, we could use 8, or.
I think 3 and 4 serve 2 different purposes.
I guess just part of
3 is more of a limit on how many people could actually occupy the short-term rental, and 2 and 3 puts a limit on the composite of the group, I guess.
And I guess that's the issue I have is, as long as there isn't a safety issue, I understand, the concern about packing a ton of people into one of these houses and the impact that could have on the neighborhood. I get trying to control that. My concern is, who is the city to start delineating what type of group is acceptable, the composition. Your kids are too old, you can't share a bedroom, that type of thing. I understand the point about inclusion, but I also feel there's possibly an unintended exclusionary effect, and then also the impracticality of enforcing it are my issues.
Exactly.
I think I prefer to strike that as well.
If we're striking number 3, are we wanting to talk about a cap in the number of party, or a cap as to how many people can be in the short-term rental? I'm seeing a couple of no's.
The problem with doing a cap on parties is you can have a family of 8 that needs to have a short-term rental, and you may cap it at 6. Well, now what do you do with that family of 8? And that was a big discussion we had about families. The two short-term rental parties, you could have 2 different families in there. But the problem that we ran into was, okay, let's say you have a 2-bedroom STR. How many people can you cram into 2 bedrooms, right? So that the first one, number 3, was you've got 2 guests per bedroom, and any amount of kids under 6 in that bedroom. So if they're over 6, you need another bedroom. You're renting another bedroom. That was the discussion. So that's where that all came from. It wasn't, we're limiting how many kids we can have. It's how many kids you can have in a bedroom. And you could have, if you got 4 kids under 6 and the parents in 1 bedroom, have fun.
Try to
You're not gonna get any sleep, but okay, go ahead, So that's where it really came from. We're not trying to limit kids. It's we're limiting people per bedroom, not to the exclusion of in how many kids you have in there. So it's, we don't want to have a thing like, spring break where you get 30 people in a house. You just don't want that.
I need to pause for a minute. I'm just noticing it's 8:01. I remember we talked at our retreat about needing to make a motion for meetings that go longer than 2 hours. So it seems like we're at that point where, in order for us to continue past 8 o'clock, we would need a motion from council.
Has that been codified?
I thought it was 9 o'clock.
It was 9 o'clock because the
it's
start time
7.
was 7.
So was that voted on? There was no action taken at the retreat.
Correct.
I've taken a vote on that I'm aware of. I've attended each council meeting since the retreat, so I'm not aware of.
I would like to consult with council and see if everyone is in agreement that we continue this conversation past 8 o'clock. Thumbs up, head nods. Excellent. Great. We will continue.
So to that point, and that's why apparently the answer is no. I was hoping there'd be some kind of safety or health occupancy standard regarding just the sheer number of people, because I completely get that. You don't want to pack a bunch of people into a single bedroom. I just got concerned when it got down to the level it did, and, drawing that line, what if you've got a couple 7-year-olds, you're saying, no, you're too old, and who's going to police that? So if it was a body count thing, like how many people per square foot or per bedroom or whatever, I'm totally fine with that.
And just provide clarification for anyone who's traveled with children, if you do Airbnb or VRBO, they have limitations built into that. They wouldn't allow you to say, hey, I've got 4 children and allow you to do 1 bedroom or 2. You have to. So there's limitations there, and I can speak from personal experience. And so that's already built in. So if someone's actually going to be truthful and use the system and say, hey, I've got X number of kids and these are the ages, because you have to specify the ages of each kid and each adult that's renting the place, then there's already a limitation within that system, because they have a number of beds that let you sleep on the floor. You couldn't say, well, I've got 3 kids that are going to sleep on the floor. They won't allow that.
Thank you. So is there a specific proposed change to number 3?
Just striking it.
You've mentioned striking it. I think Marcus also mentioned striking it.
Gary mentioned it.
Head nods.
Yeah.
So there's consensus from council to strike C3.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. Next comment is in nuisance activity E, section 1, talks about the definition of the what raucous noise may include. The question is whether or not this definition is necessary, if the ordinance already includes reference back to LSMC chapter 9.56.
And to follow up on that, so I have had some brief discussions with Director Wright, and I understand this language was put in here because it addresses potential nuisance activity related to STRs, perhaps specifically, or perhaps using different language, something more subjective, not decibel levels. So I guess my suggestion would be, could we accomplish that same thing in the nuisance portion of the municipal code rather than spreading it around?
Well, I believe that we can actually. I wasn't very happy with some of the responses that we had at the STR committee about this, because we do have a nuisance code, and someplace else in here, we're saying that you have to provide your occupants with the rules. Well, part of the rules are the noise ordinance. So I do believe that this particular subsection here is not necessary because it is covered. So.
But we did discuss that just last meeting. If we're going to include this in the STR, the Parks and Recreation, and each of our codes that speaks about certain behaviors, we should also include those in there to make sure that we're consistent across ordinances. So we're not just singling out STRs. So if we want to do that, which I don't, but if we want to do that, then let's do that for the Parks ordinance and the other ones that we're going to be reviewing.
Well, I hate to do this, but I'm going to. I want to point out that if you go back to 6B9, where you have the other applicable sections, where you're trying to put in other sections of the LSMC code to be more specific about what people are needing, we're doing the same thing. We're in a circular logic here. If you want to take this one out of this one because of that, then why do we need to put all the other ones in 6B9 or in B9? Because there are codes, and it's like counsel said, legal counsel said, it's up to Director Wright to have those in there. So we don't want to be inclusive in every one of our codes that say, well, you have to do this, 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 and this, and this. In every one of our codes, because it's like you said, that's going to be trying to simplify our codes, not make them harder.
So,
the reason why this kind of provision might be justified in this code as opposed to other codes is because we are requiring, operator responsibility for this particular, and for them to be available to handle problems. Our existing noise code says, for public nuisance noises, it is unlawful for any person to cause or allow to be emitted a noise which has been determined to be a public nuisance noise. So that allowance thing is kind of there. This makes it specific that if you're the operator and basically you've been informed that there's this problem and you do nothing about it, you can be individually responsible as well as the people that are causing the noise. And if you're a non-responsive operator to these problems, then you may get your permit revoked. So it serves a purpose with respect to this particular type of use. And I gather, I didn't suggest this be put it in there, but I gather that's the value of it. If I was looking at this from what purpose does it serve? That's the purpose that it serves.
But my understanding is not that the E is being asked to be stricken. It's the definitions in 1 and 2 and potentially 3 that you're asking.
correct. And so to kind of address multiple points here. So jumping back to the first, the references to the other codes further up, to clarify my thoughts on that, I was just thinking of key guideposts. So yes, it places the onus on Russ to conduct the review, but it serves, listing key sections would serve as a guidepost for what the applicants will be judged against. To Councilmember Daughtry's point, I'm not advocating that we include references to other code sections in one and then eliminate the other. As Councilmember Jorstad said, it's the definitions. Is it not enough to just simply refer back to the nuisance code and address the definitions there as needed? So you're simplifying by saying, see this other code section instead of, creating a variant of it in another place in the code.
And I will say, after I did look at your comments, I did go back and look at the noise ordinance, the nuisance ordinance. And I will say a lot of the language is very similar. It talks about amplified noise. It talks about it a little differently. The biggest disconnect I see, though, is going from Title 14 and this chapter to Title 9. Title 9 is criminal code. So by putting the link from a nuisance activity now, where the idea had been established, you wanted this to be a civil process. Now this section of it, does it become criminal and follow a different code enforcement process? And it's fine if we use the association by reference. I just want to be clear that in the case of an STR on a private property, what permit path are we or what code enforcement path are we following? That most everything in the land use code and the development codes follow the civil code enforcement process, versus a nuisance activity in a park is a criminal activity, which is different. So anyway, I just want to be clear that it's okay if we associate by reference. As I said, as I went back, they do create a lot of the similar ideas. The idea of you're not having amplified noise, you have hours of control and some of the performance standards, yes, they may get into decibel levels, but the substance is that you are unruly activity. And so again, I agree that can be problematic to have parallel code, but it is again, how are we going to enforce that? And how are we putting folks on notice that it's there?
One of the comments I heard from our constituents was the issue of, and I fully appreciate you not wanting to load this up with definitions and so forth, but when you have to hunt and find sites, and I'm just looking through this, we've got a reference to a table 14.16. We've got reference to RCW 6437. We got business license reference 4.04. We've got a couple more references here of table 14.72. We got the noise ordinance, chapter 9.56. So it's kind of this piling on. This is great. We've got this little 4-page deal, but I got all this other stuff to research. And where do I find it? So, I guess, how do you kind of get some of your arms around some of the tenets of what we're trying to accomplish here without having for a constituent to go on a big field trip to find the answer?
Scavenger hunt.
Not burden the staff with, gee whiz, could you help me find this stuff? Because, just again, there's probably more here. Definition sites 14.44, it becomes rather laborious to research this stuff for a person that is just trying to get some knowledge.
I'm going to suggest that we put that in the parking lot, because I think that's a really important point, and it's not one of the comments that we're trying to kind of address tonight so that we can have a final ordinance. I would agree. I think some sort of a cheat sheet or a addendum that shows, here's where to go to find these resources, I think would be really beneficial to the folks that are looking for that.
Gary, I share your concerns. I appreciate you sharing that.
So back to the ordinance in this section. Russ, just to be clear, if we strike 1 and 2, the definitions of raucous noise and loud and unruly gatherings, but we reference the civil, the LSMC, that's the civil, that's at the 9.56, then is that sufficient?
I think if you want to keep the basic references to 9.56, yes, I think you can do that, and there's similar definitions, but I do think we would need to expand just a little bit of language that clarifies the intent if this is a civil process related to STRs. And I would look to legal counsel if you have any other sort of feedback on what that link might look like.
Expand the language in 9.56 or in this STR ordinance?
in the STR ordinance, just clearly stating that it follows Title 17 for code enforcement, not a criminal.
Would that meet expectations if 1 and 2 were struck, but there was another sentence added to clarify that this would be addressed as a code enforcement,
A civil,
a civil?
I would support that.
Yes, that would be plenty sufficient.
Okay. Is that enough direction? Director Wright? Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And since
Mhm.
I'll just move on to the next part, which is then the last sentence.
Yes.
That talks about putting someone in an at-risk position. Again, this is just like the condo, or excuse me, the HOA, CCNR comments from the very first section, similar idea that we just want to put it out there. Hey, we're not expecting anybody to put themselves in harm's way, especially if they are an off-site agent coming into a volatile situation. It's the language isn't necessary. It doesn't change the intent. Again, it's just a statement of even though we're asking you to intercede, we're not asking you to put yourself in a situation that would be volatile or.
The method of interception could be calling 911.
Yes.
Okay. I think there's a comment later on about that section specifically, so we'll keep going in order and we'll get to that one in a moment. Next comment from Councilman Donahue is in section F2. The wording appears to conflict with LSMC 17.20. Could we change the beginning of the subsection to a violation instead of multiple violations and remove the word progressive?
So in summary, the ordinance is drafted appears to it references multiple violations, and then it also implies escalation in the penalties that are laid out in another portion of the code. However, that portion of the code gives the enforcement officer the ability to select any one of the enforcement actions based on a single violation. So in that sense, the two would conflict.
So if it was an egregious violation, it would take a single event.
And they
Versus
could,
if they were
Correct.
smaller events, then it would require multiple, and so that allows the discretion of the. And I would be in favor of, if there's an isolated egregious act, they should have the ability to, on a single case, to impact their license.
and that's currently how 1720 is written.
And Councilmember Peter Shagan also had comments on this section. You know, his critique was on multiple violations. You know, you sort of picked up the word progressive enforcement. So really, all of subsection F2 can be stricken and it doesn't change anything because the compliance statement is in F1. Just complaints will be processed according to our business license and our code enforcement code.
Okay,
I'm good with that.
everyone in agreement? Great, thank you. Moving to definitions, we have 2 additional comments from Councilman Donahue. The first one is on the definition of boarding house. The comment is just that this term doesn't seem to be used anywhere in the ordinance. And so is the term being added somewhere, or do we remove this definition? What's the purpose of having it there?
So boarding house is an existing definition. And as it currently resides in our code, it refers to tourist homes. And the intent of this ordinance is to update from tourist home to short-term rental. So it just changes out the language. So it's not something new. It's not addressed in this ordinance, but it carries through other portions of the code for consistency.
Is everyone okay with it staying there
So
based on that?
why would that definition need to be within this, though?
Because this is we are updating the tourist home section of our code. We are repealing and replacing it with a short-term rental ordinance. And so to continue to have the term vacation rental in a definition for boarding house is inconsistent with the action of this code.
I apologize. I'm still not following why that would have to be in 1408 specifically? Like, I understand if boarding house is defined in the code.
1408 is our definition section.
Okay, so it's not specific. I understand. Okay, gotcha.
Is everyone okay with leaving it as it is? Okay, great. Thank you for that description, Director Wright. Moving on to the definition for short-term rental party. The text of the ordinance does not use the term short-term rental party. It only says rental parties. Would suggest changing one or the other to make this consistent.
It's an easy change.
Easy change.
I'd support that.
Great. We have made it through Councilman Donnie's comments. Thank you very much.
Third of the way there.
Third of the way there.
You can leave.
Thanks, Ryan. Moving on, and there is some overlap, so we've also addressed a few of Councilman Ewing's and Councilman Peter Sagan's comments as well. And now we have this down, so we're just going to speed through the rest of this. It's going to be great. Councilman Ewing, going on in order of your comments. The first is in regard to, sorry, I lost the point where I can reference the ordinance. All right, just a minute. It's in regards to the fee, changing the fee from $500 to $250. I have too many things open here, sorry.
I'm in support of lowering that fee as well. I don't think most people are going to put a short-term rental because for no reason other than they're trying to make some money to help pay for a house or do other things. $500 seems quite high.
I agree. So I did provide some documentation that talked about our price ranges for permits and gave you the ranges of what we look at for type 1 permits, which is around $200 to $1,000. That's based on the staff time that it takes to process that. I'm looking at about $100 an hour. And I would recommend, or I would suggest that these permits as written would be around 3 to 5 hours of staff time. That's from the permit intake to the routing, to putting a staff report together, any comments that go back out. So I would guess that it would be in that 3 to 5 hour range. And then type 2 permits, which is one of the other suggestions we'll get to later. Those permit fees are typically going to run from $500 to $4,000. And the $500 fee is something that council had looked at earlier in the year and recommended to move forward. That was when we were considering this to be a type 2 permit. So I don't think the $500 permit fee is out of line with other similar types of permit and the effort that it would take to process this permit.
We've got Councilmember Dickinson, Tadgett, myself are in favor of lowering it. I haven't heard from the other four what the comments are.
I think it's important that we cover the staff costs for any permit that we issue, whether it's a dog license or, you know, a demo permit or any kind of land use permit. That's always been kind of our mantra in the sense of, you know, providing the income that pays for the staff to process those things. So I would support the fee that covers that, whether it's $350, $400, $450, or $500 or $700. Whatever it takes to cover the cost of administering that permit.
Yeah, I just want to have efficiencies and I work for government, understand how sometimes those things work when things aren't always as efficient as they could be.
I mean, you get community development director stating it's going to take 3 to 5 hours.
I'm supportive of keeping it at 500.
So even if it only takes them 3 hours, it's $300, not $250. Because he's talking us tap time $100 an hour, which isn't unreasonable. So I think we need to recognize that all of our permits, those fees need to cover what it takes to process those permits.
We got 3 in favor, lowering 2 that are favorable at least. Kim and Ryan, what do you guys want to weigh in?
Yeah. So let's,
I
Right.
I agree with Councilman Pierce Hagan that we need to cover the cost of what our staff are doing.
okay, Councilman Donahue.
I agree. We need to cover costs and just the realization, for me is I'm not in a position to provide a different number. And so I have no reason to disagree.
Okay, so we have 4 council members in favor of keeping it at 500. I think we should all remember that this ordinance will be reviewed periodically, and we can certainly check with director to see if that time is accurate. And if we find that the time that it takes to do this work is less than 3 to 5 hours, I think we can adjust that accordingly.
I also want to point out that this is not a vote.
No, thank
Right,
you.
not a vote.
No,
This
it's
is a
not
straw,
close.
this is a
could-
straw.
This
poll.
could become an amendment when we actually go into the ordinance. So
Right.
I just want to say that was a straw poll. We're not voting. It
Correct.
wasn't a 4 to 3
Not
vote.
voting. Right, I agree.
There's no action
But
to
it
be
wasn't-
taken on this
We'll
this
vote that
evening.
it was not voting.
The next comment by Councilman Ewing is to strike the requirement to notify neighbors.
I can't abide by that. That's it's one of the tenets of what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody knows what's going on.
Councilmember Ewan, can you kind of give us some insight as to your thought process on that?
Yeah, so we've watched that play out in the city with someone who provided some interesting testimony about some issues that happened with their short-term rental and the neighbor. They're kind of a back and forth on what went on, and even at the very meeting that the renter was making comments about her neighbor. And one of the people there had digital documentation, provide proof that the information that was being provided was inaccurate. And so what's my concern, and I shared it in here, that as we apprise the neighbors and the people, that are notifying, say, hey, I don't want this here. I guess there's no requirement for them to like it. They just have to be notified. That will exacerbate. I just really bothered me listening to that scenario and watching, hearing the public testimony and then getting the feedback from the neighbor and then getting the other side of the story. It doesn't seem, it seems like we're gonna be creating more issues than not for that. I mean, I can certainly understand hey, we want to make sure that if something happens, they gotta that it can be addressed. It just seems like it would be exacerbated in that situation that we had here in our city. With a neighbor to neighbor dispute we're going to see more of that as we notify neighbors that don't want the STR.
Thank you. So Councilman Ewing is suggesting striking the requirement. Are there any other council members in agreement?
I would be in agreement as well. For me, it's part of a safety issue. If you have to tell everyone in your neighborhood or people around you that you're having a short-term rental that may be vacant from time to time, then that causes, for my part, safety. I mean, that lets everyone know that there's going to be an empty house and you can go get squatters in there. You can go break in. It's not being washed maybe as like other homes. So I don't feel the need to let everyone in the neighborhood know that this house might be vacant from time to time.
I would argue that if you have an operator that allows squatters and STRs, we got a huge problem. So I guess I'm not supportive of striking that. I think public notification is part of the process of open government as to what's going on here. You have an existing neighborhood that is impacted by, in my opinion, a commercial business. I think it's only right to say to that residential neighborhood, hey, this is what the city has allowed. And we're just notifying you of this activity of that will be coming forth. And I think from a practical standpoint, I think we're all concerned about our neighborhoods as to folks that are coming and going and just the general awareness of what's around us. We live in an environment that is unique, I guess, in the sense that personal safety is a huge issue right now. And so I would encourage that we do have public notice of an activity that's going to take place in an existing neighborhood.
Thank you.
It's not a commercial use though, and it's not defined by a commercial use. In your mind, it might be a commercial.
But it was my opinion that it was a commercial use. So
I just don't feel like I should have to let my whole neighborhood know what I'm doing with my property. It's none of their business.
Well, likewise, then we should notify short plats, formal plats, demo permits, things of that sort, land use activities of what's going on.
So we have two council members who wish to strike the language and two who have said they do not wish to strike the language. Love to hear from. I personally am not in favor of striking the language. I would like it to remain. I'd like to hear from Council Member Donahue and Councilwoman Dickinson.
I'm fine with not striking the language and making sure that people know what's going on in the neighborhood. And it's kind of a hard one, though. I get what Councilmember
Yeah.
Paget's talking about.
Sure.
Member Peters Hagen. It's not an easy one.
Thank
But
you.
things just aren't always easy. And I think that would be the right thing to do.
Councilman Donahue.
So I will apologize. I don't know off the top of my head, and I've looked at my packet, what exactly is included in the notice. To me, I would hope there would be a compromise there to be struck where you could provide notice that there's an STR without providing critical information that would allow someone to time when you will be there and when you won't. And so I would like to know more about what is included in that notice. I'm sure it's available. I just don't have it, so I apologize, but that's what I would need to make a decision.
So as the ordinance is proposed, it says that the city would create this notice. And essentially that's, yes, what you're describing. It would be, there's a pending land use action. And here would be the contacts, the local contact, emergency contact, but it wouldn't be giving specifications of anyone's business plan or anything like that. It's just, here's a land use action, and this is the intended use of this property.
I would be okay with that.
And that's an improvement over what the subcommittee came up with, leaving a notice on the door and encouraging people to trespass. So I mean, I'm.
Yeah, that's why we took that part out of it.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. If they don't have to disclose a business plan and specify the dates and things, I think that provides a little measure of, I'm supportive of that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move forward. The next comment is regarding housing stock data. And I think that we discussed this when we were talking about
We've already covered that.
the cap, so we can move
Yes,
forward.
Caps, we've covered that.
Thank you. Moving on to your next comment, distance between rentals change to number of parcels or combo. And I think that this is also going to be talked about when we look at the type of, sorry, I just lost the word. The type 1 versus a type 2 permit. And so I wonder if we want to talk about both of those.
Well, can I throw another wrinkle in there? I'm supportive of Councilmember Peter Shagan's proposal to have it the circle method. My concern of the 500 feet goes back to the same thing with the number of the cap. There was 2 members of the committee said 500 feet, 2 said 250, 0 deliberation, and then the draft said 500. And so if you do it by parcel numbers, it allows for the bigger lots Brenda lives on Lake, they have a acre lot. So if you look at the space there, if you did it there, I mean, I guess their neighbor could have something, but if you do it by the actual number of lots, the density, I guess, issue that Ryan brought up, to prevent the density, I appreciate that. And I wouldn't want there to be any density of that in any neighborhood. But I think 500 is really big. I mean, it's almost 2 football field lengths. And that's huge.
Russ, what is our notification for type 2 permits? 500 feet?
Type 2 is a 300-foot radius.
300-foot radius. That's fine with me.
So amending that language to be a 300-foot radius would meet.
300, I'd be fine with 300. And I just feel like the circle, I'd like to be able to just look at it and put a circle on there instead of trying to go.
Sure.
I understand what we did with marijuana and the other stuff. I just think that's more balanced so that if you have just the different types of neighborhoods and the configurations, that there is no real true density.
Okay.
And that's what I would like, is no true density, but I think we're too restricted with the 500 feet.
Okay. Is everybody else in agreement? Or-
I like everything about that. My only concern is how Director Wright, how practical or how easy is it for the city to measure by radius? Because you have to determine the central point, and then also for people looking to apply for an STR permit to determine that on their own.
So the city would use its GIS tool, and it wouldn't be from the center, it would be from the parcel boundary that we would generate that buffer, but it's a fairly easy exercise for us to do.
That would be part of the permit process. I mean, the staff would have to say, you're not allowed to have this because you're within 300 feet of another one.
Right.
So there would actually be multiple points then from you'd have to measure from multiple boundaries. Am I understanding that correctly?
So if someone came in with a question, hey, we want to do an STR, yeah, we could do an easy analysis. You know, we'll be having a database of where there are STRs and we could easily sort of extrapolate. But those are different. We're talking about two different things. So the code, the one code provision says there'll be a 500-foot separation, and the noticing requirement, as had been proposed with a type 1 permit, was just notice to the adjacent parcel. Now we're bringing in this idea of also a type 2, which has the 300-foot radius. So now we're sort of talking about three things at the same time right now. So
so I think if we end up, if there's support for the type 2, then that totally changed the conversation about the fees and the radius and things like that. Totally changes our conversation. So maybe, Andy, President, excuse me, if we could get a feel for the type 2.
I was going to suggest, let's pivot and go over to that comment by Councilman Peter Sagan, if that works for everyone, and kind of hash through the type 1 versus type 2.
Well, the big component of the type 2 is public notification. So,
So would you be open to keeping it a type 1 if we expanded public notification?
Community Development Director, right? What other tenets are there of a type 2 versus type 1?
really it is the public notification. So, and this is the exact same conversation the council had after it came back from the Planning Commission the first time, where there was a big discussion, should it be a type 1 or type 2? And that is the distinction. If you wanted to have a 300-foot mailing radius, I would say you make it a type 2 because you are creating that broader net, and that's going to open it up to potential for wider comment, which then, obviously staff is addressing. With the type 1, giving notice to adjacent property owners is not unheard of, but it is a bit of an aberration. It's giving a limited public notice, so it gets to the scrutiny of the application.
To be clear, none of my suggestions are going towards a type 2. I'm not in favor of a type 2 in any way. The subcommittee and the Planning Commission came up with a type 1. I don't see any reason to make it more restrictive with a type 2.
Is there anyone other than Councilman Peter Sagan who is supportive of having this be a type 2 permit?
So the question I have on that is, could we have a type 1 permit, which would be less expensive, but have a larger circle of notification? Or is what you're saying, Councilman Ewing, that you don't want to go with larger?
I'm supportive of the neighbors that are immediately touching that property being notified. I'm supportive that I'm not in favor of involving a whole neighborhood for safety reasons mainly. The more people that know about that, and the more neighbors involved, the more likely we are to get into issues.
Did you not support 300 feet though, just a minute ago?
No, 300 feet for as far as the distance to limit the
Limit between
Saturation.
the saturation. That's a density thing. 300 feet was for,
I was not talking about that. I was talking about.
That's what Russ said. We ended up talking about two
why
different
we had
things.
Yeah.
two or three
No.
different things all wrapped up in
density. I was not talking about notification. I was just talking about neighbors. I was talking about density. I don't want density.
So one of the issues that I have with this is when you're talking about adjacent properties, that doesn't include people across the street. Is that correct?
By definition, it doesn't. Contiguous, it's sharing a common border, so.
Do you think
Or do
that
you-
was the intention?
It was adjacent, your next door neighbor.
Okay.
Was the intent. And if we're skipping ahead a little bit, as we get to Councilmember Peter Shagan's comments about adjacency, I did put in other perspective language that could say in proximity to, if you wanted to widen that to
Across the
neighbors
street.
on each side, across the street and behind.
Would that language change meet your desire in terms of notification if it were in proximity to versus adjacent to? And
Certainly.
included
Right, right,
across the
right,
street?
Right, right. Well, I think, I mean, the definition of adjacent is probably not accurate to begin with, is for what we're talking about here. But as far as notification, I would support Councilman Daughtry's comment if we could do a type 1 with 300 feet notification to properties in proximity to the proposed use.
So the suggestion is keep it a type 1, but expand notification.
Right. So it's basically a backdoor type 2. I mean, is what it is. I mean,
Well, yeah, but
No, it's not, because the type 2 gives the opportunity for comment and type 1 does not, correct?
Right.
So there is a difference there.
14
And
day
cheaper.
comment period with a type 2 permit.
And a type 2 has an appeal provision also, correct?
And-
Type
and
1
so
doesn't.
would-
So
so
there's
what
more
you're
to
saying
it.
within any residents within 300 feet of that circle of that proposed STR would be
Well-
notified.
I'm not necessarily saying 300 feet. I mean, what would it be to have, how could you write this to where you've got your adjacent properties, including the ones across of the street?
If you want to include
Your-
that.
On
I
your
mean,
backside, your front side, your sides, people that are going to be basically affected.
So how you want to define that, if you can define it to anyone that's immediately in that area, but people that are 2 streets over or 5 houses down the road, I don't think is necessary.
I'm
Yeah.
saying the same thing you are.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah, the more people that know about it, I just think they're,
I totally agree with that, but I think that if you just do the adjacent properties, that people across the street who are going to.
if you want to include that, I think that's reasonable.
You gotta do it.
I
How do
think
we-
that's reasonable.
So how do we do that, Russ?
Yeah, and that was my suggestion that if we jump forward using language not adjacent to in proximity of, and then we clearly define what does that mean, which is properties bounding on a common property line and immediately across the street. or
Okay,
something.
that's fine. The other problem with a type 2 to a type 1
Right.
is it costs more money to do a type 2.
So it
And we've already had that
seems as though we have consensus for Russ to change that language to include proximity, the chair boundary that are directly across the street versus any measurement in terms of feet.
Right, but as far as permitting, it's still the 300 feet, and I'm not totally clear on how you go with, like for me, I've got a pie-shaped property, so you go 300 feet from here, and then I've got another 100 feet that goes across the back of my property, then you go from that.
Sorry, we're
there.
back to talking about density, right?
Correct.
And permitted.
Sorry.
Okay, just,
I just want to be
I
clear.
want to make sure everybody's clear.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
So that part I'm not clear on. In my view, I take the center of the property and do that. But it sounds like there's a different process that's I'm not familiar with, so
That's.
What are we talking about? Which part are we talking about now? Are we talking
density.
density? Okay, great.
So anytime you're doing a property measurement, you're going from your property line, doesn't matter the shape of your property. It doesn't go to the middle and build out from that. It is from your property line is where the noticing commonly starts in every jurisdiction I've ever, worked for. So,
If that's the universally regarded methodology, then I'm supportive of that.
okay. So in terms of the distance between rentals, we're going to keep it as is.
No, didn't we change it to?
300 feet, and we're supporting Peter Shea, Gary's thing of 300 feet, so it's a circle.
Oh, right,
So-
right. Thank you.
Sorry,
300 foot radius.
my high school geometry is going off my head. If you can pick any point, the most relevant point on any of the property boundaries, is it really a radius, or are you just taking a direct measurement from the closest
You're
point?
doing a buffer of the parcel line to create an affected radius.
Anyway, 844.
I know what I'm.
Yeah, Russ, I trust you.
This has got it. Russ has got it.
300 feet from property. Got it.
You may
Okay. Continuing on with Councilman Ewing's comments. So we talked about distance between rentals. We've already talked about number of licenses in the city. That issue is taken care of. That was section B3. Section B7, we've already stricken the perjury language. Section C1, we talked about owner occupancy and have given feedback around that language. Section C3,
Struck that one.
Already addressed that.
we've already addressed C3.
C5, I would like them to specify gas, water and electric.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I would agree as well.
The only reason that we had a neighbor with a water leak and no one knew where to find their turnoff, and we had 3 neighbors out trying to find it, and no one could find it.
Oh, boy.
You know, and so, yeah, anyways.
So adding that to C5B, that's sounds good.
As far as I'm concerned, that should be in long-term rentals also.
Should be everywhere. We should have it in our.
Damage I have to work on.
Item 10 regarding the conflict of state and federal laws regarding,
Russ's
Marijuana.
comments are, I've supported Russ's comments. We can strike that.
great. Moving on to parking spaces, C6. Let's see, let me get back to your specific comment so I can reference.
One
that.
parking space for 2 bedrooms. Not one parking space for per bedroom. And the proposal, I think, from Director Wright was per party. I guess that's more of a topic. The initial proposal from the council subcommittee was 1 parking stall for 2 bedrooms. This one's 1 parking stall per bedroom. That just seems really, you know, if I'm renting a 4-bedroom, which is what I have, I want to go rent one. It means they have to have 4 parking stalls for me driving my van with my family. They need to have 4 parking stalls. I'm actually only occupying one stall. And others in similar situations with a larger party that's going.
So you're proposing to change it 1 parking stall per 2 bedrooms.
Instead of 1 parking stall for
Per
1
bedroom.
bedroom.
I don't have a problem with that.
I don't either.
What about the issue of trailers?
Not allowed.
Of what? I'm sorry. What did you say?
Trailer.
Boat trailers,
Oh.
recreational vehicles.
Well, the ordinance proposed by the subcommittee said if adequate parking is provided on site.
That's up to the site manager or whether they allow
Okay.
it or not.
All right. It was an issue that was brought up, so.
Yeah, and I thought that was a positive thing that I saw from the citizen subcommittee was that was a thoughtful comment that they could compromise that they come up with.
Mhm.
Any opposition to changing the language from 1 parking unit per 1 bedroom to 1 parking space for 2 bedrooms?
Nope.
Okay,
What if you changed it to 1 parking per party?
That might not, I don't agree with that because.
the party
if
could
you
be
have
8 adults.
You have 8 adults in a party. That's one car.
It's true.
Okay,
Okay.
consensus
All right.
to
Appreciate that.
amend the parking requirement, Russ,
It's 1 parking space for 2
for 2 bedrooms.
bedrooms. We already
Next,
addressed the E 1, 2, 3, with Brian's comments, and I guess my last comment was the local contact. That I don't understand, every property manager, and we've got an expert on our council. Property management expert. The first method of contact is either telephone or electronic. In this case, if there's an issue, they're going to try and reach out and contact the person. If it's a significant issue, they're not going to try and address it themselves. As we address, they're going to call the police if there's a very significant issue. Because they shouldn't put themselves in harm's way. And so the overwhelming majority of property managed handled telephonically. If it's not an emergent situation, someone puts their garbage cans out or something in the wrong place or whatever. that's a phone call or an email. I don't think it's necessary for someone to drive and physically go and contact the person. So I think their chance of better contacting someone either by phone or by email than trying to physically try and contact them.
Sorry, are we on the conversation about where the local
Local
contact
contact, right.
lives in Snohomish County and not
In
the Lake
Snohomish County
Stevens
instead of
UGA?
the Lake Stevens UGA. That
I
just,
don't think that's the issue of physical contact. The issue is more, I think,
How
of
quickly they can get.
accountability and how the issue will be addressed. I mean, if we've got a rental manager that's out of Portland, I'm just guessing, but that person probably isn't going to be as concerned when he gets a phone call from Lake Stevens as a rental manager that lives in Lake Stevens or Snohomish or ever.
The conversation that we had at the committee revolved around being able to get there quickly to resolve the issue. That was what the conversation was. It was not, you're over in South Everett and now you've got, and there's an accident on the trestle and we want them in the UGA so they can get there quickly. That was what, that's the,
Right.
that's the whole crux of it.
And we're actually talking about two different things again. I apologize.
Oh,
So
good.
the requirement for residency is for the owner or operator. The owner and operator does not have to be the local contact. The local contact is the proxy when the owner or operator is not available.
That's true.
Right, but it's that point of contact
Correct.
that is the issue.
Yes.
So
but the point, Kim, is the contact, the immediate contact is going to happen telephonically. My first step, if there's an issue with something, I'm going to call, pick up the phone and call. I'm not going to physically go try and drive to make contact. And so, and I think any property manager would also say that they're not physically going to go do that.
But I think what I'm hearing you say is if there is a need to respond physically to the property, the desire is for that response to be quick, and that if they're in Lake Stevens, that would be quicker than not in Lake Stevens. Is that my understanding?
Sure, or if the police need assistance from the local contact to go on the property.
Right.
To deal with the problem, go into the house, to have that person come and take care of it, it's really more of a compliance issue. Than how do I contact this person issue.
It's how quickly can they get there?
Yeah.
I'm under the opinion that I think if they're in Snohomish County, they're going to be able to react probably similar to whether that person happens to be at Safeway or, you know, out and about and gets the phone call and has to drive. I don't see why why you have to be Lake Stevens. I think Snohomish County is appropriate just as much as a Lake Stevens person. Nothing says that person's going to be sitting by the phone waiting to go run out to that property.
So
I was going to add that.
I'm reading the definition of local contact. I don't know that we have an issue here. I think we're all,
Saying the same.
I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading the definition of local contact and I'm not hearing anything from anybody that's in contradiction to this.
That's correct.
I'm seeing it differently and and that's why I'm concerned. I see. What I don't want to have there be confusion, and that's why I think the definition of C1 was, the verbiage there was very, with the number of days and who was there and when, that language there was confusing enough. And I think like to believe that I'm reasonably intelligent. If you listen to some of the public comment, they would question that. But it's confusing enough for me. I think we can adjust the wording and tighten it up a little bit so it's cleaner.
And I apologize if I assumed or misheard what you were saying. So I'm focusing on the definition of local contact, and there's nothing specific about what local means. And so to the point of they could be located in, Snohomish County, I don't see anything that prohibits that in the definition.
Correct. I just,
It's the owner or the owner's operator that has to live within the urban growth area to maintain that residency requirement, which is different than who they appoint to do their business if they're not
Right.
not present.
So I guess that allows a lot of flexibility then. If they're not available, then they have their contact and that contact is wherever they need to be.
Yep.
Okay,
I guess, yeah, okay,
you're okay with the current language?
yes.
Okay. Moving forward, local contacts, we talked about the circle of the property versus same side of the street. Russ has good language for what that means. We talked about number of licenses.
We covered, I think we covered, checked all the ones that I had on my
Okay,
sheet.
okay. Thank you. Moving into Councilmember Peter Sagan's comments. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay, here we are. Oh, that's what I went into. Sorry about that. Gary, your comment about the defining the feet encircling property has been addressed. We've talked about number of licenses. We talked about the type 1 versus type 2. 4B, 8I, I think we talked about that in the beginning around adding language in accordance with state and local regulations. Is that accurate?
Which one?
Around the perjury. It was around the perjury conversation.
No, it was about basic health and safety. B8I, you're talking?
B8I, yes.
It talks about basic health and safety standards, and I just suggested in accordance with state regulations
Oh,
for
thank you.
fire
Yeah, I
extinguishers,
see it.
smoke detectors,
Oh, just
Thank you.
adding in accordance with
Yes.
state regulations, right?
state regulation.
Any concerns with that, Director Wright?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Sorry.
The B9 doesn't apply since we're still talking about type 1, so.
Okay.
And 10.4 doesn't apply.
We took that out.
We took that out,
Yeah.
right? And then E3, the responsibility to solve the nuisance activity, Director Wright
Which one was that?
Right.
addressed.
Yep.
The sentence about the expectation isn't that the contact put themselves in harm's way.
Right. We took out. C3 though, right? Yeah.
On F2,
We decided to strike the entire thing.
that's right. And then definition of adjacent property. So you want to talk about the specific definition after our conversation around notification?
Yeah, I mean, definitions 14.08, adjacent property means any property contiguous. That's not, adjacent property is not. I mean, adjacent property is property that shares a common border, or I should say contiguous is a property that shares a common border. Adjacent property could be across the street, it could be left, right, and not physically connected.
I think
So
we've included that in there.
We've included across the street though.
Well,
But,
yeah,
but
he's
do we need to
saying-
change the
We
definition?
need to take the word contiguous out of there and put in adjacent.
Although is this definition used in other ordinances?
Yeah, adjacent typically means a property sharing a boundary. The recommendation we had talked about a while ago was getting rid of adjacent property and putting in a requirement that defines in proximity to, so there may not be a definition that would probably be embedded within the ordinance itself.
Would that work?
sure, I don't know what you just said.
Just take out the definition of adjacent property and
Okay.
put the language of proximity in
Okay,
the
yep,
ordinance.
sounds fair.
Great. Definition of local contact.
We just talked about that.
Gary, did you have any other concerns about?
Well, I mean, kind of globally or I mean, what, I would like to see some sort of, language dealing with the current STRs that are not in compliance, in the sense that with this ordinance, I would hope that we would direct or put a provision in there that says the unauthorized STRs need to come in compliance in a certain amount of time.
Is there a plan for that?
So yes, they are already under a code enforcement process. So that's already underway, and with the idea that they can come into compliance today by applying for a tourist home rather than codifying what you're suggesting, though, I think it's appropriate that we can create some whereas language in the ordinance that specifies we're trying to create a path to bring them into compliance. So the current plan is if someone comes in and if you have started the process and apply for a tourist home, that we give them an easy process then to become conforming as an STR once these regulations are adopted with a minimal, sort of review, just to a minimal compliance review. So we're definitely thinking about it, talking about it. And by the time we bring a final ordinance to you, I think we can put that in the ordinance, but not codify regulations that prescribe what that process is, since it's going to be a short-term process to get them into compliance.
So I do have a preference that if those who are taking substantial steps to come into compliance with the tourist home ordinance as is currently written in good faith, anticipating this ordinance being passed, soon, that those fees apply towards whatever those fees are towards this. I would hate to have someone pay $400 for the tourist home and then say, oh, by the way, we just passed this in April and now you have to pay another $500, whatever. I wouldn't like that.
Okay.
I think that would be unduly burdensome on the applicant.
I would agree.
Me too.
So and then my last comment is, I guess a question, we don't really know how many STRs are operating. What if there's 35 of them out there operating currently right now? What
Well,
happens?
We upped it to 40. We upped it to 50.
Yeah, we got it.
Now.
Oh, well, that's true. Well, prior to this, it was.
Right. That's true.
Okay, so say there's 55.
Well, it's just like we've done with other ordinances. We put a cap on it's first in,
First
they
in,
get
first out.
First
Okay,
in, first out, and
okay.
not a lottery or anything else. And
So part of our review that we talked about was that if they get an inordinate amount of people wanting to do SPRs, then we'd have to go back to council and start thinking about that. And then are we going to increase the cap or not? And I don't know how that would go.
Okay, just asking the question.
And then just to highlight Russ's last point, this code would become effective 5 days after the ordinance is adopted. Russ, do you have everything you need? Do you have any questions of us for clarification of this conversation?
I think I've captured everything, and I'm counting on Clerk Challen that she did an amazing job of capturing these ideas as well.
I got it.
All right,
We got a couple people writing some notes down. Okay,
we'll compare notes.
excellent. We're gonna move on. Oh, Councilman Dottie.
I guess I'll take this opportunity. In light of Commissioner Davis's comments, I just want to say, and being the planning commission liaison, I want to say thank you to everyone who worked on this. The reason we have a legal system is because people will inherently read this and disagree and see things a different way. And I just want to make it clear, any of the proposals we made tonight are in no way a knock against the amazing amount of work that went into this by everybody. When I was reviewing this, there was no question in my mind who did the heavy lifting. And so I just want to be clear that that is very much appreciated and the work is highly respected. And I hope that this is viewed as a constructive process and not an antagonistic one, because it is generally appreciated.
No, I agree. And I think that having this conversation tonight, even though it was long, it was necessary to make sure that we dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's and that we knew exactly what we're talking about. And during the SDR committee, we got into some depth in those areas, but in some of the ones that you brought up and everybody else brought up, we didn't get to that depth. So it's important that we as a council talk about these things just like we just did to make sure that we are clear on what we're trying to legislate to our constituents. So, I mean, if somebody's going to come up to me and ask me a question about it, I need to be able to answer their question.
Exactly.
And so I appreciate that the fact that you and Steve and Gary put forth your comments on what we had already accomplished. I didn't, like I said a couple weeks ago, not married to this. I want, if there's changes necessary, then let's get it changed.
Right.
And I think we did a good job. So.
Yeah, thanks to each of you for your contributions and for our civil discourse. Much appreciated. Moving on to discussion item B, draft council agendas. Is this Jean or Kelly or both?
I can address it.
Great.
The question out there is it helpful to council to have the draft agenda coming forward? And if it is, we just want to make sure it's clear to the council that it is a draft.
Right.
It comes from our calendar, our working calendar. So it's a work in progress. If something doesn't come back that following week, it means that we didn't have enough information. The timing was off. And so it got pushed out for some reason.
So the question I have about that, Gene, is it onerous for the staff to be able to put out the next agenda, draft agenda to us?
No.
And if it's not onerous, then I don't see any reason not to complete. I never had the idea that that was set in stone when we got it. It's a
Right.
draft. I understand that.
What draft means.
It's helpful for me to have it. What I don't like is getting emails at 4:45 or 5:30 saying, oh, we've added this on and it's a 40-page report. And we don't have time to look at it. And that happens too often. And so if we have that draft agenda and say, hey, this is what's there, that means the staff should have that stuff ahead of time and should be far enough along where that's going to get to us in a reasonable time frame, the Friday before at the latest. So that we can give appropriate attention to that material.
And that if there is something on the draft agenda and it doesn't end up making it onto the regular agenda, that we understand that that's,
Oh, sure.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? Is it okay? Can we just read what the agenda items are going to be? Do you want a handout? Is it helpful to have someone to take away with you? Or just reading it?
It is helpful to have that, yeah.
Okay.
But I also think, I mean, today we just got the bulleted
Yeah.
list. I think I don't think it has to be in an agenda format.
Okay, because that's a little more time consuming for me, but this is easy.
I think it's in your packet. I'm fine with just a quick bullet.
Yeah, bullet
That-
points are fine.
Okay, great.
I'm missing-
So sorry that I don't have copies for everybody, but
Oh, is this
Councilmember
my own?
Karstad,
I
I
would be
read them
happy-
for tonight.
I would be happy to read. I'll read it and
Oh,
then I'll
nice.
pass it around so everybody can see it because some people are more visual. I get that. Tentative agenda for March 28th. Parks maintenance guidelines, city sponsorship donations policy, council procedures, moving city admin eval to LSMC, proclamations for flag lowering for veterans, Parks Title 10 ordinance, and the ADA transition plan. And I will pass this
And
around.
Finance Director Stevens just added the opioid settlements as well on consent. Yeah.
All right, as we're reviewing that, I think we can start to transition into our executive session. We have an executive session this evening to discuss potential litigation per our CW 42.30.110.1 subsection I. Executive session is expected to take about 5 minutes and there is no action to follow.
Yeah, Councilmember Tadgen, I'll call you on your cell phone.
Why don't we at least say 10 because we got to get organized, got to get the phone call and
Executive session is expected to take 10 minutes. It is now 9:08.
We'll be done by 9:18.
We will be done by 9:18 PM with no action to follow.
Everybody's running with that.
I'll wait for your call.
To pick the point on the 13.
Move to adjourn.
The 35.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Third.
Say aye. Thank you.
Take that.
We're adjourned.